over the Midlands and Wales, but we'll hold on to some hazy sunshine across southern England and East Anglia. And after that cold start, temperatures could creep up to 15, 16 degrees here, but it's a cooler day as the winds pick up further north with the outbreaks of rain. That rain will continue to trickle south, so it'll turn damp over the Midlands, Lincolnshire, East Anglia through this evening. Patchy rain then spreading across the southeast overnight, much of the southwest staying dry. The winds notice coming down from the north, but actually it'll be a much milder night tonight compared to last night because there'll be much more cloud around, temperatures mostly holding up at 7 or 8 Celsius. So won't be as chilly first thing tomorrow morning. Will be quite a drab start, cloud and rain over Wales and southeast England. That should tend to clear away, but lots of showers will come in over central and eastern parts. A much brighter day for western Scotland tomorrow. Northern Ireland cheering up too, with some good sunny spells developing in many areas through the afternoon. But the wind's still coming down from the north, so still bringing a fairly chilly feel.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you all. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Coming up on today's show, last night Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill was dealt yet another huge blow when the Lords once again revolted and frustrated the Commons, and today GB News can reveal it's about to get a whole lot worse. And it's back to the 1990s as the Tory party suffered its 7th sleaze scandal, this time focusing on shamed MP Mark Menzies. Would it trigger yet another by-election? And police have smashed a worldwide online fraud network with dozens of cyber criminals getting arrested. Over 70,000 Brits were conned into surrendering bank details and their PIN numbers to fraudsters. And Mark White will have all of the latest and help to keep you safe. And today, Prince William made his first public appearance since Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis. And while helping a charity cook dinners today, a visibly moved Wills was handed get well cards and promised to look after Kate. We'll have the full, wonderful story. All of that coming up in your next hour. Once the show, always a pleasure to have your company. Another terrible day ahead for Rishi Sunak. Has there been a decent day you can even remember? And do you remember yesterday I was delighted to show the biggest St George's flag in the land in my home city of Nottingham. 62 foot, an absolute monster of a flag across the Market Square on the Council House. Well, today, a Tory MP has floated the idea it's time for a minister for flags to protect our cherished flags. Do you agree with that? Would that get your vote? Let me know. There's a new way to get in touch. You can send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Get in touch. I'll read out the best before the end of the show. Keep them clean. Over to you. But before that, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories. And first to some breaking news from Scotland this afternoon. It's been confirmed the Scottish Government has scrapped its interim climate target to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. First Minister Humza Yousaf told the Scottish Parliament the overall net zero goal of 2045 won't budge. The Minister for Net Zero, Mari McCallan, said while the original target is unattainable, a revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale that she said is feasible, fair and just. And some more breaking news to bring you. The UK and the US have issued new sanctions on 13 Iranian individuals in response to Iran's attack on Israel at the weekend. Britain's also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and the chief of its army. It comes after Rishi Sunak said earlier this week that G7 leaders were working on a package of coordinated measures against Iran. Lord Cameron's currently at a G7 meeting in Italy, where he's calling for a clear message to be sent to Tehran. In other news, Sir Keir Starmer says the Rwanda scheme is a gimmick and a waste of taxpayers' money in the wake of the latest blow to the government's flagship Rwanda bill in the House of Lords last night. The Labour leader's comments come as Downing Street declined to recommit to the Prime Minister's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground. It's understood Number 10 will publish more detail about the timing of the first flights to Rwanda once the asylum legislation has passed through Parliament. MPs will consider the Lords' amendments to the bill next week, but the government has indicated it will not be making any concessions. Labour are calling for police to investigate what opposition ministers have described as extraordinary allegations that an MP misused thousands of pounds of campaign funds. The Times reports that Mark Menzies used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off bad people who he says locked him in a flat and demanded thousands of pounds for his release. He denies any wrongdoing but has agreed to give up the Conservative whip. But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says it's taken far too long for the government to act.
I'll be honest, there's a degree of frustration as well. We're 2 weeks away from really important local and mayoral elections when, there's a lot of positive arguments that we want to make about the change we can bring about in these elections. And yet again, we're talking about misbehaviour by Tory MPs. And if ever you needed evidence of why we need to turn the page on this shower and have a fresh start with Labour, I think it's in these allegations coming out today.
The prescription of puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormones for children in Scotland has been paused. It follows a landmark CAS review of gender services for under-18s, which revealed children had been let down by a lack of research and weak evidence on medical interventions. Ministers in Scotland have welcomed the move, but campaigners argue the decision is the wrong one. Like other parts of the UK, Scotland has seen a rapid rise in the number of young people questioning their identity or experiencing gender dysphoria. In England, the NHS has already stopped prescribing puberty blockers. A criminal gang involved in a website which taught subscribers how to defraud thousands of victims in the UK has been shut down by British police. 480,000 card numbers belonging to as many as 70,000 people were accessed via the website Lab Post, with criminals subscribing to the site taught how to access bank details and PIN numbers. A man has been sentenced to 4 years in prison for a hoax terrorism campaign targeting primary schools, airports and shopping centres. In 2013, Gary Preston sent 42 envelopes containing white powder and threatening letters that caused panic and evacuations at various locations nationwide over a 6-week period. The envelopes contained talcum powder and threatening letters with Arabic texts. One envelope led to the evacuation of a 300-room hotel. The 64-year-old was arrested and pleaded guilty to 21 charges. LNER train drivers have announced another strike on Saturday, leading to the cancellation of around 3 in 4 services. Members of ASLEF will walk out for the day and ban overtime over the weekend in a fresh dispute over terms and conditions. The rail operator says it'll run just 26% of its usual routes between Edinburgh, London and West Yorkshire. The walkouts are separate to their long-running pay dispute between ASLEF and 16 train operators. And some royal news. The Prince of Wales has returned to public duties for the first time since Princess Catherine's announcement that she's being treated for cancer. William's been meeting volunteers at a food distribution charity in Surrey. As well as lending a hand in the kitchen, he was also presented with Get Well Soon cards for his wife. The Prince's last official engagement was a month ago. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now we start with yet another bad news day for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. And I'll be honest, I can't remember having too many good news days, can you? You know what they say about bad news coming in threes. Well, today, Downing Street has refused to recommit to Rishi Sunak's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground to Rwanda. Chris hopes beer is safe. And Mark Menzies has given up the Tory whip after an incredible story which claimed that he had misused campaign funds. And the Prime Minister woke up this morning to the news that, according to a major opinion poll in the Daily Mail, the Tories are trading the Labour Party on every major political issue, including defence, tax, migration and, wait for it, even Brexit. Well, I'm joined in our studio by our political editor, Christopher Hope, and also the former Labour Minister, Bill Rammell. Welcome to the show, gents. Let's start with you, Chris, and let's start with Rwanda, because, of course, we were joshing about the fact you had a bet with the Prime Minister that a flight wouldn't take off this spring. A single pint of beer. Seems like you've won a pint.
Yes, it was in May, the second election, which, of course, when we struck that bet back in September, that was going to be the case. Now, I was in Parliament last night for this ping-pong between the House of Commons and House of Lords. 4 amendments pushed by the Lords, turned over by the Commons last night. 2 then came back, surprisingly, from the House of Lords, from Lord Hope and Lord Brown, Des Brown, the former Labour Defence Secretary, and Lord Hope being the former Deputy Head of the Supreme Court. They're trying to find little ways to tweak and, for the government's point of view, water down the Safety of Rwanda bill. Lord Brown wants to mean if you served overseas with UK forces in Afghanistan, you will then not be sent to Rwanda if you arrive here legally. Lord Hope wants to have regular checks on the safety of Rwanda. The government is digging in, though, saying it's not going to happen. We're back on Monday for more ping-pong between the Commons and Lords. This is how democracy happens in our country. It's not a problem. It's what happens all the time. The Lords test maybe if they are not sure about some Commons legislation, particularly when it wasn't in a manifesto like this one. But the outcome is the government is now not saying for the first time in months that the first flights will take off with people on the plane to Rwanda by the end of spring. Spring ends June 21st. So what they're saying is even by late June, these flights may not have taken off. What they will say is when they get this through the Commons and Lords, which could be very late night sittings on Monday, they will update on the timescale. It's a very big setback for Mr Sunak.
June the 21st, the longest day. Every day feels like the longest day for Rishi. And that tax alert there, I think that was Rishi cashing out early. I think it was. I think number 10, we know...
I'll buy you a lemonade, Chopper. let go.
OK, Bill Bramwell, let's bring you in at this point. You must be watching this calamity. Not only on Rwanda, but on Mark Menzies. You must be watching this and just thinking, how soon can this be over? The Labour Party must be licking their lips to get into power now.
Well, I mean, it's really serious. It's got real echoes of the run-up to 1997. You know, the sleaze, they're as mired in sleaze as John Major's government was in the run-up to 1997. They're also playing it long. And I was reading an interesting piece by Charlie Faulkner recently, the former Labour Attorney General, who said that playing it long actually made it worse for the Conservatives because there's so much pent-up frustration and wanting to see the back of them that it increases the scale and the size of the likely Labour victory. And, you know, Rwanda is a gimmick. It's costly beyond words. It's not a deterrent. And the substance of one of the two remaining amendments, the government is refusing to commit to not deporting Afghans who've worked with British military in Afghanistan. I mean, that's shocking. And I understand that Rishi Sunak actually intervened personally to block a possible compromise on Wednesday of this week, which would have eased the passage of the bill. So it demonstrates yet again his totally inept political management and leadership. OK,
we need to talk, Chris, about the Mark Menzies situation. An astonishing story, almost feels made up, but it's not funny at all. This has serious implications. And as we said, just the latest in a long roll call of shame.
Yeah, it's almost like a Mount Rushmore of alleged wrongdoing by Tory MPs. You've got William Wragg, got Mark Menzies overnight. Labour call it a disturbing incident. We've got this. He's been suspended from an unpaid role as a government trade envoy. He's alleged to have used thousands of pounds from donors to fund medical expenses and to have made a 78-year-old aide and trying to ask for money because he's been locked up by some bad people at 3 a.m. You know, it's almost like straight out of the pages of a fiction writer. You wouldn't believe it. He denies any wrongdoing. He's had the whip suspended, or he's suspended himself. And there's lots of these things happening. There's almost a lack of discipline in the Tory party. But just going back to what Bill Bramwell said there, you mentioned there, have the election now, Rishi. He's 25 points behind. Looking at the Daily Mail today, he's behind on every measure you were describing. Even Brexit, Martin, you were saying there. If he went early, then the inevitable defeat at the polls is his fault. If he goes long, it's the party's fault. He would be mad to go have an election now.
I don't think it's binary, and I think the risk for him is the longer this goes on, the worse it gets. And, you know, whether it's now, whether it's in June, whether it's in September, October, or even, God help us, in the early part of next year, he's going to own that. You know, he's the unelected Prime Minister who came in with a commitment to clean up politics, to bring integrity back to government, and he's completely failed on that front.
And on the key metrics in this poll in the Mail today, there are two that really stand out. Best Prime Minister, 34% Keir Starmer, 19% Rishi Sunak, 48% don't know. I mean, almost half the people would rather have somebody who's not even on the ticket. But also on the economy, Bill, and if you're ranked as the best leader and the best at handling the economy, the rest of it is mere detail, is it?
Absolutely. If you look at the history books, if you lead on those two indicators, then, well, the history books say you're certain to be elected as the next government. Now, I'm not complacent, but I do think 14 years of Tory misrule, of austerity, of massive cuts in public services, of falling living standards and the highest tax burden since the Second World War are coming home to roost.
OK, Bill Bramwell, Chris Hope, superb stuff. Thanks for joining us, and we'll have more of you, of course, later in the show. Now, as we've already said, Mark Menzies is certainly not the first Conservative MP to be accused of misconduct in recent years. In fact, The Tories have lost 6 seats since the 2019 general election, and they're expected to lose another one in just a couple of weeks' time. Let's go back over this roll call of shame. In November 2021, former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson resigned after he was found guilty of breaking lobbying rules. Imran Ahmed Khan quit following his conviction for sexually assaulting a teenage boy in April 2022. He was subsequently jailed for 18 months. Less than a month later, Neil Parish stepped down after he admitted watching pornography on his mobile phone in the House of Commons. In June 2023, David Warburton resigned after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine use. Former Tory whip Chris Pincher eventually resigned from Parliament in September 2023 after an investigation found that he had drunkenly groped 2 men more than a year earlier. Peter Bone lost his seat after a recall petition. He'd been suspended for 6 weeks for bullying and exposing himself to a member of his staff. You still with us? Deep breath. And Scott Benton quit just 3 weeks ago after he was caught in a lobbying sting. And he had been the MP for Blackpool South, and Labour are now widely expected to win that by-election there next month. Astonishing roll call, isn't it? Now we can add Mark Menzies to that list. Now, I'll have lots more on all that throughout the show, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now, brace yourselves, put on your party hat, because there's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win a Greek cruise, travel goodies, and 10 grand in cold, hard, tax-free cash. Here's all the details you need to hop on board.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Now, I've already brought you that news about the delay to the Rwanda plan, but that's not the only setback that the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis, because 70 asylum seekers staying at RAF Wethersfield in Essex were moved out because of radiological contamination at the site. Well, it didn't seem to be a problem when the RAF were there, was it? Anyway, I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I don't think you can go and watch a Shakespeare play unless you already know it. It's almost like you have to understand the story and the characters, and perhaps have even done a bit of reading into it. Because if you went completely blind, especially in today's world where we don't speak in that kind of way, it is, I think, probably a bit alienating.
But Dawn is saying it is alienating at the moment because of the lack of representation.
You know what, the actual phrasing they use, right, OK, the disproportionate representation propagated white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender male narratives. I'm sure there's people sitting in a room going, what's the most ridiculous thing we can come up with today?
Yes.
But are really just chuck all these words at it, cisgender, and it's just insane. Of course, Shakespeare was what it was back in the day, and that's why it's mostly blokes and they're mostly white.
And lots of speculation that he was actually gay, isn't there? Because he never really saw Anne Hathaway very often and stayed away a lot of the time. I don't know, maybe he was a big
He might have been transgender for all I know. I mean, I don't...
Begins, I'm looking at you.
No, I think you're right. I mean, you know, I think that goes for the profession too. I mean, I do think I mean, I remember seeing Macbeth in London with Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, and it was one of the most exciting evenings ever. And it was a cold night at the Donmar Theatre, outside and inside, and that gave it atmosphere. There are certain things, and you go along and see something else, and you think, I'll walk out in the interval.
Yeah. Macbeth is a sexy play, though.
Let's talk about, there's so many. Can I live to be 100?
Oh, this is depressing.
I think it is depressing. I like to stay here now. I don't want to live to 100.
Oh, don't say that. I'm right behind you.
I don't even want to. My father died at 63. That'll be me gone this year.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:21. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, after we featured the country's biggest cross of St George in Nottingham yesterday, later in the show, I'll tell you about calls for a new minister for flags. Gets my vote. Moving on, the Home Office has been forced to move asylum seekers out of an ex-RAF base in Essex after safety concerns were identified on the site, including radiological contamination and unexploded ordnance. And it's another setback for the Home Office and their attempts to reduce the number of hotels being used as temporary accommodation. And our South East of England reporter Ray Edison can bring us more.
Well, this is difficult news for the Home Office. We've got to remember that asylum seekers moved into this location, RAF Wethersfield, around 10 months ago. Now, at that time, the Home Office had declared this site, this former RAF airbase, as safe and fit for purpose. And now we're hearing that around 70 asylum seekers have been taken out of this accommodation and put back into hotels. And we know, don't we, that the Prime Minister was very keen to stress that the government does not want any asylum seekers in hotels because it's expensive and they're looking for more cheaper alternatives such as this. Why have they been moved? Because safety risks have been identified, we're told, including the possibility of radiation and potentially as well unexploded ordnance. Now, this site here is one of the Home Office's largest accommodation sites. It could house a maximum of 800. They've capped it at 800. Initially, they wanted 1,700, but they decided to compromise because of resistance from local residents. We don't know the exact number of people that are here, but locals say they feel it's around the 600 level. Now, last month, they got planning permission to use this site for 3 years. They got that through something called a Special Development Order, or an SDO, and that enabled them to circumvent council permission. And there were concerns raised on that SDO about the risk of contamination, and it does appear that those concerns have now been realised. Well, Priti Patel is the former Home Secretary, of course, and she said that these latest issues once again highlight why the Home Office was wrong to use the Wethersfield site for a large-scale asylum accommodation centre, and she said that at the time she warned the then ministers that this site was unsuitable and their plans were flawed. Well, it would appear that that is coming true right now.
Thank you, Ray. It's an astonishing state of affairs, isn't it? Nobody in the area of RAF Wethersfield wanted this. The same as in RAF Scampton, of course, the site of the historical Dambusters, and the Red Arrows were based there. Two stories we've been following throughout the duration. The locals weren't consulted. It was done as a fait accompli. No matter what they said, no matter how they complained, they simply weren't listened to. Time and time and time again, locals said, how can it make any common sense to plant 2,000 military-aged men, because that's what they would be almost entirely, if not entirely, men, into a community, a small community, with already overstretched public services. Time and again, locals told us they were struggling themselves to get a GP appointment, struggling themselves to get dental appointments. They were concerned with some justification for the safety of their children in an area where there is not a lot to do. It's the same in Scampton. Again, people have been camped out there now for over a year, come rain or come shine, saying exactly the same thing. They weren't listened to, they weren't consulted, and when they did complain, they were often smeared by the media, by their opponents, as racist, as fascists, as right-wingers. And yet, on GB News, time and time again, we've given the residents of these areas a voice, and we've listened to them, to their legitimate concerns. They're not right-wing. They're just concerned about the condition of their country. They're concerned about porous borders. They're concerned, as many security experts are on this show, who we talk to time and time again. We simply have no way of knowing who is in our country. Record legal immigration, record numbers of boats, 6,000 already this year, over 534 on Sunday. Oftentimes, no documentation. We don't know who these people are, and they're being dumped on these areas. And now, isn't it funny that the safety and the human rights of the inmates, the residents, the asylum seekers at Wethersfield, it could be dangerous to them. There could be historical, radiological issues from previous weaponry, perhaps unexploded ordnance, none of which was a concern when servicemen and servicewomen were there. It wasn't a concern then. Why is it a concern now? Who's gaming this system? Which lawyers are pulling the strings? Who's in control? The residents don't get a say. Yet it certainly seems that the voices from within those camps, they seem to be the tail wagging the dog. Now, the Home Office has issued the following statement. They said this: Wethersfield is safe for asylum seekers, and we are working at pace to ensure that we abide by the conditions in the Special Development Order. Now, we have always been clear that the use of asylum hotels is unacceptable, which is why we've moved asylum seekers to former military sites, which we ensure are safe to accommodate asylum seekers prior to use. Now, we've got lots more to come, but first, here's your weather with Alex Deakin.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight. The wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in, and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas. And now through this evening, it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. Southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
Now, there's a new way for you to get in touch with me here at GB News, and you send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. And you've already been quick off the mark. I've got a bunch of comments here. John says this on Rwanda: if the Rwanda plan was not opposed so many times and given the chance to fail rather than assume it will fail, then the cost would be not quite so much. Just get behind it and remove the unwanted illegal migrants. John, it's been about £500 million so far. £500 million and rising. Not a single sausage has left this country, not a single person. And Danny says this on the Mark Menzies scandal, and we read out that roll call of shame. 6 other MPs who've been forced to quit the Tory party since 2019. Danny rather simply adds this: can we just investigate every member of Parliament in order to drain the swamp? I've given up on the lot of them. Well, Danny, harsh words, but look, a lot of people will maybe be feeling the same. A lot of people seem to be losing complete faith in politics altogether. But let's keep the faith. Let's keep going on GB News. And there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. And I'll talk about the Scottish primary schools that have started appointing pupils as LGBT champions, primary school kids. But first, here's your latest news headlines, and it's time for Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. The top stories this hour. And first, a recap of that breaking news we've heard from the Foreign Secretary that the UK and the US have issued new sanctions on a number of Iranian individuals in response to Iran's attack on Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron, who's been meeting with G7 leaders in Italy, says it demonstrates the unequivocal condemnation of Iran's attack on a sovereign state. Britain's also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and the chief of its army. It adds to the more than 400 sanctions already imposed on Iran. It's been confirmed the Scottish Government has scrapped its interim climate target to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. First Minister Humza Yousaf told the Scottish Parliament the overall net zero goal of 2045 won't budge. The Minister for Net Zero, Mari McAllen, said while the original target is unattainable, a revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale that she said is feasible, fair and just. Sir Keir Starmer says the Rwanda scheme is a gimmick and a waste of taxpayers' money in the wake of the latest blow to the government's flagship Rwanda bill in the House of Lords last night. The Labour leader's comments come as Downing Street declined to recommit to the Prime Minister's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground. It's understood Number 10 will publish more detail about the timing of the first flights to Rwanda once the asylum legislation has passed through Parliament. MPs will consider the Lords' amendments to the bill next week, but the government has indicated it will not be making any concessions. The Labour Party is calling for a police investigation into MP Mark Menzies, who's been suspended from the Conservatives over claims he misused thousands of pounds of campaign funds. According to The Times, he used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off bad people who he says locked him in a flat and demanded thousands of pounds for his release. He denies wrongdoing, but Sir Keir Starmer says there are a lot of unanswered questions. And in the world of sport, Team GB have unveiled their brand new Olympic kit ahead of the Paris Games this summer. The kit features the classic red, white and blue and British colours. Adidas, who have produced the clothing, said the aim was to create a design that celebrates the unique aspects of Great Britain while encapsulating the passion within every athlete. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2452 and €1.1685. The price of gold is £1,914 and 14 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,869 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Tatiana. And we've got lots more still to come on the show. In a few minutes, I'll bring you a special report on online fraud. One website claimed at least 70,000 victims in the UK alone, but the police are fighting back. But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News. And here's Bev Turner with all of the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. A lane shut southbound M6 just around Sandbach and Stoke, 17 to 16. A police incident causing delays. Eastbound M56 queuing for 4 miles just away from junction 14 to Runcorn at 12. Emergency repairs continue. A lane closure in place. A vehicle fire westbound M4 slow going Field to Cheveley. That's junction 12 to 13 westbound. The inside lanes out. At the clockwise side of the M25, the QE2 bridge still queuing following an earlier bump there. London bound M11 Harlow at 7 towards the M25 path blocked a 5-mile queue for recovery work, and queues both sides of the M23 northbound is closed. Gatwick Airport at 9 towards the M25 at 8 and queuing. It's due to a collision there. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's a remarkable story, isn't it?
Amazing.
Extraordinary. And also, she was unflappable, apparently, the Princess Royal.
She's
just
brilliant.
refused to get out of the car and said, I'm not going anywhere. Extraordinary. Well, Jim Beaton was awarded the George Cross for protecting the Princess, and delighted to say joins us now, along with the former head of Royalty Protection, Di Davis. Jim, you won't remember, but I met you some time ago at the Imperial War Museum when Princess Anne was opening an exhibition to do with the George Cross, and you were there reunited with her. And you told me then what great admiration you had for the Princess, cool under fire, but you didn't do so badly yourself.
It was probably my job, and also I had a wee bit of police training, not very much, but a little bit, whereas Princess Anne had nothing, and yet the way she displayed it, you would have thought she'd been highly trained to deal with any type of that situation.
Even though you'd had some training, you took 3 bullets for the Princess. You effectively stood between her and a deranged gunman.
Well, I was supposed to be a protection officer, really, so I just tried to fuddle about. You must remember that back in 1974, there was no communication, and we were extremely lucky that Michael Hills, who was outside Clarence House and nearby, had got one of the fast police radios, or radios on his shoulder, so he was able to send a message out. Otherwise, we would have just been relying on the good old public to phone in and say there was something happening.
Yeah.
So times have changed drastically.
Welcome back. It's 3:38. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, later in the show, I'll tell you why the European Union is taking legal action against the UK in a new post-Brexit fishing row. Get your hands off our fishers. But before that, dozens of suspected fraudsters have been arrested across the UK after authorities brought down an illegal website used by thousands of criminals to defraud victims worldwide. Police have identified now at least 70,000 victims in this country alone. And our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has this special report.
Across the UK, dozens of suspected cyber criminals had a rude awakening as law enforcement here and around the globe moved in to smash a multi-million-pound online scam that's defrauded many thousands of victims. Multiple addresses were raided, and some suspects were pulled off flights at Manchester and Luton airports.
You have been identified as involved in Lab Host, an online phishing platform which allows users to set up fraudulent websites in order to impersonate online services such as banking,
This is now the front page, greeting any would-be cyber criminal trying to access the services of this illegal online site. The website LabHost is part of a hugely worrying development in cybercrime. It aimed to provide an easy step-by-step guide on how to download and use fake sites.
Your page has installed and you're ready to spam. Make sure to check that it works before starting your spam. Stay safe and good spamming.
Unsuspecting members of the public would then believe those sites were pages from legitimate businesses like banks and retailers, all with the aim of phishing, of fooling victims into revealing personal details which would be used to commit fraud.
There are, unfortunately, many enabling services to fraud. However, together with our law enforcement partners, we are tackling them. To take out an enabler means that we are able to take it out at source, and this, we hope, will send out a message to those using similar services that we can get their data and we will be onto them.
Law enforcement have identified at least 70,000 victims of this latest cyber scam in the UK alone. The LabHost site made more than £1 million from 2,000 criminals who subscribed to download its services. Those attempting to access the site now are faced with a bit of online trolling from law enforcement.
You've targeted victims all around the world. The police there may not be too happy with you. Think carefully about where you go on holiday next. That was your 2023 LabHost Wrapped. LabHost is dead now.
With that illegal site now infiltrated and disrupted by authorities, dozens of those it was training and equipping in the art of cyber fraud are in police custody and likely facing prosecution.
And Mark White joins me now. Mark, a superb report. Pickpockets used to work on our streets, now they work online. But this is a significant victory for the police.
There's no doubt it is. Fraud itself accounts for about 50% of all crime. So most of us at some time are probably likely to become a victim of fraud. And now that we conduct our lives online, really, our banking, retail purchases, going online for television services and alike, a lot of our information is out there, and potentially we are open to those phishing fraudsters coming on and stealing our information and stealing our money, creating accounts to get credit cards, bank loans, mortgages, all of the above. So there's some real concern. And I think about this particular site, and there are others like it out there, it is a very worrying departure because it's effectively criminals who are tech savvy passing on that knowledge to other criminals for a fee. They're doing it to make money, of course, and they've made from this one site alone about £1 million from 2,000 criminals who subscribed to that website. But because they are teaching them how to set up these scam websites, then potentially they are introducing into the online market many, many thousands of criminals who would never have been able to become cyber criminals simply because they didn't have the technical know-how. These sites give them that technical know-how in some easy steps, so that is a real worry.
Superb stuff. An excellent report. Thank you, Mark White, for giving us the details on that. Now, pupils in Scotland are being urged to ask kids as young as 4 if they are gay, lesbian or trans as young as 4. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight, the wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas, and now through this evening it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. The southwest west staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:47. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, at 4 o'clock, I bring some great news for all us royalists as Prince William returns to public duties for the first time since his wife revealed she was suffering from cancer. It's a really heartwarming story. But now let's get more on a story that we covered earlier this hour. And the Home Office has been forced to move migrants out of RAF Wethersfield in Essex after safety concerns were identified on the site, including radiological contamination and an exploded ordnance. And I'm delighted to say I'm now joined by Dave Price, who lives in Wethersfield. Dave, welcome to the show. This has been rumbling on for so long now. Many of the residents had no interest in 2,000 men being dumped in the area. Now they've been moved off, not because they listened to you, but because they deemed the site to be unsafe. Tell us more.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, it's been known about for quite a few years now. The Fields Association got an external consultant in to do some work on the site. And like many airfields, particularly when the Americans were involved, there was a lot of dumping of stuff when they moved out, because the Weathersfield Air Base was a major base until Stansted opened, and when the Americans moved, they dumped a lot of stuff. So it's not just radiological waste. There's also concerns about Agent Orange and some of the other chemicals that are used for degreasing and decontamination of equipment. And so therefore it's absolutely no surprise at all that they have got concerns about it. I wouldn't let my dog walk up there, to be quite honest with you.
And of course, Agent Orange was used extensively in the Vietnam War as a defoliant to get rid of vegetation. It's a well-known carcinogen. So, Dave, are you saying then that this information was public knowledge and was even mooted by yourself and other residents a long time ago, and yet the Home Office seemingly didn't listen?
Well, yes, but, you know, they haven't listened to a whole lot of issues. We could have told them before they spent £39 million so far that the base just wasn't suitable in a whole range of issues, not only the contamination, but also in terms of the state of the power, the state of the water, sewage works, etc. And one of the concerning things is they actually dug down to put in new septic tanks about 10 feet into the soil. And again, that was just risking opening up the whole site to contamination. It's just absolutely appalling, the amount of money that they've wasted up there. And like you say, what happened to the 1,900 places?
Mm.
They're down to, probably it's going to be under 600 now. What a waste of public money for what? Absolutely nothing.
Well, Dave Price, I can sense your exasperation, and I find it astonishing that you knew about this. You knew about the contaminants, and this was public knowledge, and yet the Home Office simply didn't listen. If only they listened to more people like you, Dave Price, we wouldn't get ourselves into this pickle. Dave Price, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Cheers.
Yeah, there you go. Cheers, mate. There you go. So you listen to the locals and you might get some common sense. But let's move on now to the latest gender madness in Scotland. And primary schools in the country have started appointing children as LGBT champions. Pupils are also being urged to ask kids as young as 4 if they are gay, lesbian or trans. Well, I'm joined now by Keith Jordan, who's the founder of Our Duty Group. Welcome to the show, Keith. What can you say about this? Absolutely astonishing. 4-year-olds hardly know, oftentimes, how to say things, how to write. How on earth can a 4-year-old know if they're trans?
Absolutely. It's astonishing that they're even considering putting this kind of material into primary schools. Children do not need to consider their sexuality when they're at primary school. They need to be allowed to be kids, frankly.
Yeah, no, my kids, one of my daughters is at primary school, and of course, having education about keeping people being safe and diversity, it's all a part of the modern fabric of education. And some would argue that is a good thing. But gay champions as young as 4?
Yeah, this is indoctrinating children to be activists for queer theory, in my view. And I think you'll find that the Scottish MP, Neil Hanvey, has got a very strong understanding of this and is one of the few people in the House of Commons who really gets it. So they're wanting children to embrace the idea that people can be LGBT and trans. That's absolutely fine as far as it goes, but they're extending this much more towards the political indoctrination side of it. It's almost quasi-religious. It's Trans Day of Remembrance that I think this organisation LGBT Youth Scotland are pushing. There's got to be a big question about why are we including the T with the LGB as well? It's perfectly fine to tell children that they're LGB. They certainly need to learn about different types of family, but that's probably about as far as it goes in primary school.
OK, Keith, as I said, my kids get taught this stuff at school. What age do you think is appropriate for this to be taught to children?
Certainly secondary school, when they start exploring their identity and exploring their sexuality, then of course the subject needs to be discussed. But it's the nature and the way that it's pushed on children, as if it's some kind of huge thing to celebrate. I heard a quote from a well-known gay man the other week, and I wish I could remember his name, but he said, being gay is the least interesting thing about me. And that's a sort of approach that would be far healthier to give to children. And as for teaching children that they can be trans, the organisation that I run has to pick up the pieces when those children start believing that. Because they get that indoctrination, they ruminate on it, and then they start to want to take hormones and have bits cut off. And we all know about that from the Cash Review.
Yeah, OK. We have to leave it there. Thank you for your time. Keith Jordan, who's the founder of Our Duty Group. Now, a Scottish Government spokesman has said this: "We are committed to doing everything we can to make Scotland the best place to grow up for LGBTQI+ young people. And this includes funding LGBT Youth Scotland to deliver a range of projects such as the LGBT Charter programme." Now, a day after the Lords blocked the Rwanda bill yet again, Rishi Sunak's official spokesperson has refused to recommit it to the spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now it's time for your weather, and it's Alex Deacon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight. The wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in, and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas. And now through this evening, it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. Southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News. The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's a 5-mile queue on the eastbound M56, a lane shut, junction 14 at the Chester services, down towards Runcorn at 12. Takes about half an hour to get through the scene of emergency repairs. Still queuing towards the QE2 bridge, the clockwise M25 slow going, following an earlier collision. Same issue, London bound on the M11, all lanes open though, Harlow at 7, towards the M25 at 6, but it's still struggling. A northbound M23, 2 lanes shut from Gatwick Airport at 9, up towards the turn-off of the M25 at Junction 8. Those 2 lanes shut for an earlier collision, still causing big queues. And on the ferries on DFDS, delays are up to 90 minutes at the moment, and that's between Dover and Dunkirk this afternoon as well. And for now, that's your very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. On today's show, it's back to the 1990s as the Tory party suffers its 7th sleaze scandal, this time focusing on shamed MP Mark Menzies. Labour now wants the police to investigate. Today, Prince William made his first public appearance since Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis, and while helping a charity to cook dinners, a visibly moved Wills was handed get-well cards and promised to look after Kate. We'll have the full, wonderful story later in this hour. And does it feel like the England flag and the Union Jack are constantly under attack? Well, one Tory MP is calling for protective legislation and even a minister for flags. Does that float your boat? That's all coming up in your next hour. Well, as the show, always a pleasure to have your company. It never rains, but it pours for Rishi Sunak, the embattled Prime Minister. Last night, a humiliating knockback on the Rwanda bill got worse today. We learned from our political editor, Chris Hope, that they finally admitted it looks very, very unlikely a single flight will leave this spring. After all, June the 21st, of course, being the official cut-off point for spring, the longest day every day. Feels like the longest day for the Tories at the moment. Mark Menzies now has been suspended, lost the whip. And could that mean another by-election? That's 7 Tory MPs now lost to sleaze in this term. Astonishing going on. Let me know what you think about all of that. Send your views and post your comments the new way by going to gbnews.com/your say. Get in touch. We've already had hundreds here. I'll read out the best before the end of the show. This is your show as much as it is mine. But before all of that, it's your headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story today, the UK and the United States have announced new sanctions on a number of Iranian individuals in response to Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron has been meeting with G7 leaders in Italy today. He says the action demonstrates the UK's unequivocal condemnation of Iran's attack on a sovereign state. Britain is also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and its chief of staff of the army. It adds to the more than 400 sanctions already imposed on Iranian assets.
Iran's behaviour is unacceptable, and it's right that countries come together here at the G7 and make those points, not just because of what Iran has been doing, but also as a message to Israel that we want to play our part in having a coordinated strategy that deals with Iran's aggression that we saw so clearly against Israel over the weekend.
Cameron. Now, the Scottish Government has scrapped its interim target aimed at reducing the country's carbon emissions by 75% by 2030. The First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has told the Scottish Parliament that the overall net zero goal by 2045 won't budge. And the Minister for Net Zero, Mhairi McAllen, said while the original target is unattainable, a revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale that she says is feasible. Sir Keir Starmer says the Rwanda scheme is a gimmick and a waste of taxpayers' money after the latest blow to the government's flagship bill in the House of Lords last night. The Labour leader's comments come as Downing Street declined to recommit to the Prime Minister's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground. It's understood Number 10 will publish more detail about the timing of the first flights to Rwanda once the asylum legislation has passed through Parliament. MPs are going to be considering the Lords' amendments to the bill again next week, probably on Monday, but the government has indicated it will not be making any concessions. Meanwhile, Labour's calling for police to investigate allegations that a Conservative MP misused thousands of pounds of Tory party campaign funds. The Times reports that Mark Menzies used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off what he called bad people, who he says locked him in a flat and demanded thousands of pounds for his release. He denies any wrongdoing but has agreed to give up the Conservative whip. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the scandal is another reason the country needs change.
I'll be honest, there's a degree of frustration as well. We're 2 weeks away from really important local and mayoral elections when, there's a lot of positive arguments that we want to make about the change we can bring about in these elections. And yet again, we're talking about misbehaviour by Tory MPs. And if ever you needed evidence of why we need to turn the page on this shower and have a fresh start with Labour, I think it's in these allegations coming out today.
Sir Keir Starmer. The prescription of puberty blockers and hormones for children in Scotland has been paused. It follows the landmark Cass review of gender services for under 18s, which revealed that children had been let down by a lack of proper research and weak medical evidence. Ministers in Scotland have welcomed the move. Trans campaigners have argued the decision is wrong. Like other parts of the UK, Scotland has seen a rapid rise in the number of young people questioning their sexual identity. In England, the NHS has already stopped prescribing puberty blockers and hormones for children. A criminal gang involved in a website which taught subscribers how to defraud thousands of victims has been shut down by police. 480,000 card numbers belonging to as many as 70,000 people were accessed via the website Lab Post, with criminals paying to be subscribers to the site so they could be taught how to access bank details and PIN numbers. A man has been sentenced to 4 years in prison for a hoax terrorism campaign targeting primary schools, airports, hotels and shopping centres. In 2013, Gary Preston sent 42 envelopes containing white powder and threatening letters that caused panic and evacuations at several locations across the country over a 6-week period. The envelopes actually contained talcum powder and the threatening letters were written in Arabic text. One envelope led to the evacuation of a 300-room hotel. The 64-year-old was arrested after more than 10 years on the run, pleading guilty to 21 charges. LNER train drivers have announced another strike on Saturday, leading to the cancellation of around 3 in 4 of their services. Members of ASLEF will walk out for the day and ban overtime over the weekend in a fresh dispute over terms and conditions. The rail operator says it'll run just 26% of its usual routes between London and Edinburgh and West Yorkshire. The walkouts are separate to the long-running dispute over pay between ASLEF and 16 train operators. The Prince of Wales has returned to public duties for the first time since his wife's announcement that she's being treated for cancer. William has been meeting volunteers at a food distribution charity in Surrey, as well as lending a hand in the kitchen. He was also presented with Get Well Soon cards for Kate. The Prince's last official engagement was a month ago. And lastly, Team GB has unveiled its brand new Olympic kit ahead of the Paris 2024 Games this summer. The kit features the classic red, white and blue British colours. Adidas have produced the kit. They're saying the clothing was aiming to create a design that celebrated the unique aspects of Great Britain, whilst also encapsulating the passion within each athlete. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, we start this hour with yet another scandal involving a Tory MP, and Labour wants the police now to investigate allegations that Mark Menzies misused campaign funds. The Times published claims that Menzies had used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off what he called Bad people. Well, Labour Chair Annalise Dodds has written to her Tory counterpart, Richard Holden, and part of the letter says this: it appears that this was just one of a number of incidents where Menzies elicited funds from colleagues, supporters and donors. And the article raises extremely serious questions relating to potential criminality, for example, under the Fraud Act and under the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act. A long-serving Tory worker involved in this disturbing incident says they believe the Conservative Party wants to brush it under the carpet. Well, I trust you will now take all steps to show that this is not the case. Well, I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined by Annalise Dodds and also GB News' political editor in the studio, Chris Hope. Annalise, welcome to the show. A pleasure to have you on. So last week it was James Daly, the Deputy Chair of the Conservatives, writing to the police, demanding they took action on Angela Rayner. Now it's the Labour Party's turn. You want the police to be involved in the case of Mark Menzies. Is this really a matter for the police?
Well, these are really bizarre and troubling allegations that have resurfaced today after the Conservative Party apparently was informed about them right back in January. And actually, this is a pattern of behaviour, it seems, for the Conservative Party. We have now the second Conservative MP in 2 weeks to have sacked himself because the Conservative Party hasn't taken action. We have a by-election on now in Blackpool because a Conservative MP effectively accepted cash for questions, and that's even without mentioning the cases of Nadeem Zahawi, of Suella Braverman, of Dominic Raab. It just seems, unfortunately, that Rishi Sunak is too weak to be acting when there are major problems in his party.
It's fair to say there is a roll call now of Shame Owen Patterson, Imran Ahmed Khan, Neil Parish, David Warburton, Chris Pincher, Peter Bones, Scott Benton. Take a breath. And now Mark Menzies. Do you feel now that this has a kind of 1990s whiff about it, Annalise? It feels like the old days of the 1990s, the end of the John Major regime.
Well, this is a government that definitely has run out of steam, that seems unable ultimately to manage itself. And in Rishi Sunak, we have a Prime Minister who seems constantly distracted by managing his party rather than turning outwards and thinking, well, what does the country need right now, especially with the huge cost of living crisis so many are facing and our public services, frankly, on their knees.
I'm joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. He'd like to fire a question at you too, if you could.
Annalise, it's Chris here in the studio. I just wondered, why do you think this is a police matter? What laws do you think may have been broken?
Hello, Chris. Well, we have set out the fact that we have concerns around the Fraud Act, also so-called PEPERA, that act which covers political parties, referendums, elections, and so forth, that those in politics are well aware of because it covers campaign spending. And I think there are questions, Chris, particularly for the Conservative Party, about why they seem to have known about this situation since right back in January, and very unclear whether they took any action around it until now. And the action being taken now seems purely to be in response, frankly, to a newspaper article rather than to those issues that took place themselves.
Well, Annalise, there's a heartening poll out, at least from the Labour Party's point of view, in today's Daily Mail. When it comes to the best Prime Minister, 34% have chosen Sir Keir Starmer, of course, the Labour leader, 19% Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, but 48% don't know. I wonder, Annalise, if the situation is they just see Sir Keir Starmer as the best of a bad lot. We have a Tory party imploding in front of them. Are you going to get into power simply by doing nothing?
Well, certainly we won't know which party will be in government until the next general election. And we're working very hard to make sure that we're out up and down the country speaking with people about their concerns. And one thing's very clear, that people understand Keir Starmer is about the long term. He's not interested in short-term fixes, sticking plasters. He's about the long-term missions that he's set out to get Britain building again, for example, to take our streets back from criminals and gangs. And that is very different to the kind of politics that we've had over the last few years. So, of course, we want to be talking with people about that. We need to get that message across as Labour politicians, but we're looking forward to having that discussion with people up and down the country in the months to come.
Annalise, it's Chris again. I was in Parliament last night to watch your peers frustrate the will of the House of Commons by blocking the Safety of Rwanda bill. It comes back on Monday, as you know. How is this democratic? Don't you think that at some point you've got to give this government idea the chance to see if it works?
Well, we need a proper plan in relation to the crossing of boats over the Channel, a proper serious plan. That's what Yvette Cooper has set out with the measures that she would be taking to get that backlog down, to make sure also that we have returns unit that's actually working to smash the criminal gangs that the government is doing next to nothing about. But, you know, the Rwanda scheme is not a serious plan. It's unworkable and it's extortionately expensive. It would actually cost less to take every single one of the people the government thinks could be covered by that Rwanda scheme, send them all the way to France and then put them up in the Ritz for 4 years each. That would cost less than their Rwanda scheme. And I think, Chris, you'll be aware that actually what happened last night was you saw former military staff time after time saying to the government that they should not be enabling, for example, former Afghan interpreters for our armed forces to be covered by this scheme, and the government refusing to listen to them. They should have listened to them because, frankly, we owe a duty to those brave interpreters who helped to protect our armed forces, but the Conservatives are not listening to them at the moment.
OK, Annalise Dodds of the Labour Party, the chair of the Labour Party. In fact, thanks for joining us on the show, who today is asking for a police inquiry into Mark Menzies. Thank you for joining us on GB News. Well, Chris, let's reflect on that now. I mean, that question I asked about, 48% of the population still don't know. They still don't seem particularly enamoured with either of the parties. Isn't that a problem? And don't you think that question has some validity? Yeah. It's like people just think, oh, they're all the same.
It's a problem for Keir Starmer, and it's an opportunity for the Tory party. They are hanging their hopes, their slim hopes, of winning a majority for a fifth term in probably the November election, on the idea that these don't-knows can come back to the Tory party and Reform Party somehow implode. If those two things happened, you can see Labour and the Tories getting on towards parity. But the polling in today's Daily Mail is quite brutal. It seems on all the key measures, any Tory leader wants to lead on. Even Brexit, as a former Brexit Party MEP, you almost spat that out earlier. But on Brexit, the very idea which Keir Starmer attempted to reverse for a second referendum when he was the shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer is leading on Brexit. Unbelievable, and it shows how far they've got to go.
It's an absolutely astonishing revelation that, you know, even took me by surprise. You know, my grizzled palate even thought, how on earth can the party that, with a leader who led the people's movement to reverse Brexit for all those years, poll better on Brexit? It's just mind-blowing.
They've redefined what Brexit means. Labour now say take back control of your local services or planning reforms. The idea of taking back control, so potent back in 2016, they've repurposed it for a Labour agenda. I don't think, though, that the issue of sovereignty is on the agenda if Labour win power. That's what we're told by Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, let's see. Thank you, Chris Hope. Always a pleasure to have you in the studio, never a chore. Now, to a real feel-good story, and by Jove, don't we need one at the moment? And the Prince of Wales has carried out his first official engagements since his wife revealed her cancer diagnosis. Well, William has been in West London today visiting a charity that tackles food poverty. He then visited a youth centre that receives food from that charity. And for more on that and also new revelations involving Prince Harry, I'm joined by the royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Hadel-Manku. Rafe, always an absolute joy to have you on the show. So Will's putting on his bravest face, his best foot forward. A magnificent first appearance today.
Yes, absolutely great to see His Royal Highness returning to limited public duties, as planned after his children returned to school following the Easter holidays. And it's going to be very good news, of course, for the royal family, because they've obviously been severely understaffed in recent weeks following the King and the Princess of Wales having to both temporarily take a step back from royal duties whilst undergoing cancer treatment. Prince William's last official engagement was actually on March the 19th when he went to Sheffield for his Homewards Homelessness project. But you may have known last week Prince George and Prince William were both spotted at an Aston Villa game in Birmingham, which they seem to be enjoying very much. But I'm also already seeing a lot of people actually interpreting today's activities very positively, because they believe that it means that the Princess of Wales is clearly feeling well enough for Prince William to resume his public duties. As you say, he started today by going to an organisation called Surplus to Supper, where he met volunteers. He helped to load trucks with food and then jumped into one of those trucks to help distribute it to local groups. He then put on an apron and was preparing meals and chatting with local employees about how food waste can be eliminated and used to try to help food poverty. So this really is an issue that's close to his heart. And even though he's doing limited public duties, he's trying to make sure that those few things he is doing right now are really very important to him and his mission.
And Rafe, there were some lovely pictures on the screen there for our viewers. Rachel Kandapper, who's a 71-year-old volunteer, she shook the prince's hand. She asked, "Can I shake your hand?" And he said, "Yes, you can." And she said, "I loved it. He was very down to earth. I'm never washing my hands again." Well, I hope that's not true, because you work in the food sector. But moving swiftly onwards, over the pond, meanwhile, the Ginger Whinger has some news.
Yes. So Prince Harry has now finally admitted, or accepted the fact, I should say, that he is living in America. So there were documents filed with Companies House, which is a legal requirement relating to his travel tourism or sustainable tourism firm Travelist. And in there, he has updated his permanent residency to show that he actually lives in America. Now, of course, that makes common sense. He has to have a residence, and he's clearly not living in Britain any longer. But although these documents were just filed on Wednesday, the date of the residency change was actually backdated to June the 29th, which was coincidentally, or not coincidentally, the date upon which he was asked by the king to vacate Frogmore Cottage. Now, probably an entirely accurate thing to do, but it might also be seen as a swipe, perhaps, against his father and brother for forcing him out. Because, of course, he had hoped to maintain a base in the UK. Those hopes were dashed when he was forced to leave Frogmore Cottage, which had been a wedding gift to him and Meghan from the Queen. And when the King took Frogmore Cottage back from him, it was said to have made him deeply wounded by that. But it had to be done because, you know, Harry couldn't be half in and half out of the royal family. After he decided to leave, and after his continued, you know, the attacks on the royal family, it was quite simply impossible to allow him to maintain a residence in a royal property in the UK. And clearly his alleged offers of help to the royal family while the King and the Princess of Wales are recovering weren't taken up. So it seems as if now he finally has accepted that he is firmly outside of the royal family, and therefore perhaps setting up a residency in America makes the most sense.
Superb stuff, Rafe Hale-Menke. So the strawberry blonde prince will probably stay in California making strawberry jam with Meghan. Thanks for joining us on the show. Always an absolute pleasure. Now, don't miss out on your chance to win a 10 grand Greek cruise, a luxury travel bundle, and a whopping £10,000 in tax-free cash. It's our biggest prize of the year so far. And here's how you could hop on board.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m. The Princess of Wales is now officially the most popular royal. This is a YouGov poll. It found that over 75% of people have a positive view of Princess Catherine, with Prince William only slightly behind his wife at 73%. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, is here with this one. But what would you read into that, and as to why?
Well, I think it's hardly surprising. Since the start of the year, the Princess of Wales's popularity is up 6 points with the British public, according to this YouGov poll. And obviously, at the start of the year, she went into hospital for abdominal surgery and has subsequently been diagnosed with cancer and is undergoing surgery. Look, the Princess of Wales, since becoming a member of the royal family, has committed no major faux pas. There's been no particular scandal with her. She always puts family first. And I hate the phrase born a commoner, but she wasn't born into aristocracy. She was not born into the royal family. She gave up her old life. And yes, that comes with lots of privilege, being a member of the royal family, but it also comes with enormous challenges, such as everybody prying into your private life, particularly when it comes to your health. And I think the British public are very much on side with that.
Whereas Prince Harry and Meghan continue to be unpopular. 76 compared to 31% having a positive opinion of Prince Harry, and only 26%, 50 points less than Princess Catherine, is Meghan.
Yes, still not looking great for Harry and Meghan. Prince Andrew is far below them as well.
Doing well on negative views, meaning fewer people have negative views about her than anyone else, is the Princess Royal, Princess Anne.
Indeed, yes. The most hard-working royal, if you go by the number of engagements she carries out each year. No nonsense, no fuss. She never gets herself into any kind of arguments or scandals.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:27. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, let's get more on that Rwanda plan now, and it feels like this soap opera's been going on for longer than Coronation Street. Well, today, Downing Street has refused to recommit to Rishi Sunak's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground to Rwanda, and Sir Keir Starmer says the policy is a gimmick.
It is absolutely important that we stop the small boats coming across the channel. That has got to be done. And that's why I've always said we've got to take down the criminal gangs that are running those boats in the first place. And I'm determined that we will smash those gangs. What will not help is the Rwanda gimmick, which has cost an absolute fortune to remove a fraction of the people, £2 million per person. That money could be used to smash the gangs and stop this vile trade in the first place. So I would roll up my sleeves and tackle this in an effective way, not a gimmick.
Well, I'm joined now by David Campbell-Bannerman, who's the chairman of the Conservative Democratic Organisation. Welcome to the show, David. Always a pleasure. So, round and round we go. Groundhog Day, echoes of Brexit, nothing happening. The Lord's frustrating the Rwanda bill. And once again today, Rishi Sunak's office has had to admit that it now looks increasingly unlikely a single flight will get off this spring. Another missed target.
Well, yes, I think it is political, this objection by the Lords, the ping-pong, as it's known as, back and forward. I think this is the biggest ping-pong session we've had in 15 years, according to the Times. So it is serious. I think they are taking advantage of the fact that, you know, we have an election due this year, probably this year, not January, and they're milking it for all it's worth. And I think it is worrying that they're doing that because it's a clear policy. It was a clear decision by the elected chamber in the Commons. And I think the Lords is skating on thin ice on this, actually. It is quite concerning what they're up to.
Well, it absolutely looks like, well, we knew from the outset it was a joined-up takedown of this bill. It was Tony Blair's former legal advisor who headed this up, joining up with the Lib Dems. It certainly seems like a joined-up campaign to frustrate the Conservative Party, a la Brexit, which I mentioned before. What does this mean for Rishi Sunak, though?
Well, I think it's very worrying for Rishi Sunak. I mean, we've got the local elections coming up, and, you know, it could be very bloody. I mean, the polling is terrible in a number of areas. And if he can't deliver on all these different areas, like stopping the boats, turning them around, and the results are bad, then I think he's on the ropes and he'll have to step down, I think, or step aside.
Do you think it's time to do that? Is it time to appoint a new leader, or would that be chaos? Would that be bedlam? Divided parties simply don't win elections, do they?
Well, you know, one doesn't want to do it too often, obviously. But I mean, I think the reality is, when you look at the actual data, 4 out of 10 Conservative voters last time are not voting at all, and 4 out of 10 have gone to Reform. It's only 1 out of 10 that are actually looking at Labour and the Lib Dems. So the point is, if you have strong leadership that reassures our own voters, and that can be done with a new leader very quickly, could only take 2 weeks to do a leadership election, and you have the right policies, then we can turn things around in 6 months. Boris did it in 6 months. From 9% we were in the Euros in 2019, and then he won this staggering victory. So it is possible. Yeah.
OK, David, I'm going to ask you for a name. If not Rishi Sunak, then who should be leading the Conservative Party into the next general election?
Well, I think it depends, you know, what they offer, to be honest. But I mean, obviously, I like the programme, the policy programme, Suella, Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg. There's a few names out there. Penny has some strengths. Kemi has some strengths. But I mean, I think there's a lot of reassurance would be needed on some of these candidates. But we certainly need centre-right, because that is what the Conservative voters are all about. That's why they've gone on strike. That's what's happened. They've gone on strike. We need to get them off strike to save the country and save the party.
Superb stuff. David Campbell-Bannerman, who says Tory voters are on strike, and there's a list of names he believes will get them to go and cross the picket lines. Thank you very much, David. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, and there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Rishi Sunak has cracked down on smoking and the homeless, but now smartphones in schools are in his sights, and find out more next. Is he making the right call? We'll find out. Have your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour: the UK and the United States have issued new sanctions on a number of Iranian individuals in response to Iran's attack on Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron, who's been meeting with G7 leaders in Italy, says it demonstrates the unequivocal condemnation of Iran's attack on a sovereign state. Britain's also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and its chief of staff. It adds to the more than 400 sanctions already imposed on Iran. The Scottish Government has scrapped its interim climate target to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. First Minister Humza Yousaf told the Scottish Parliament the overall net zero goal of 2045 wouldn't budge. And the Minister for Net Zero said while the original target is unattainable, a revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale she said is feasible. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says the Rwanda scheme is just a gimmick and a waste of taxpayers' money. In the wake of the latest blow to the government's flagship bill in the House of Lords last night, the Labour leader's comments come as Downing Street declined to recommit to the Prime Minister's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground. It's understood Number 10 will publish more detail about the timing of those first flights once the legislation has passed through Parliament and MPs back to consider once again those amendments from the Lords, we think on Monday. And Labour is calling for a police investigation into the Conservative MP Mark Menzies, who's been suspended from the party over claims he misused thousands of pounds of campaign funds. According to The Times, he used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off what he described as bad people who locked him in a flat and demanded a ransom. He denies wrongdoing, but Sir Keir Starmer says there are a lot of unanswered questions. And in the world of sport, Team GB has unveiled its new Olympic kit ahead of the Paris Games this summer. It features the classic red, white and blue British colours. And Adidas, who've produced the clothing, said the aim was to create a design that celebrates the unique aspects of Great Britain whilst also still encapsulating the passion within every athlete. Let me just bring you some breaking news we're receiving from the Criminal Cases Review Commission. They have offered what they're calling an unreserved apology for failing Andrew Malkinson, who spent 17 years in prison for being wrongly convicted of rape. Now, his case, you may remember, was a case of an atrocious miscarriage of justice. That was at least what the government said at the time. He spent 17 years in jail for a rape he says he didn't commit, and at one point was living rough and sleeping in a tent. He was a 37-year-old security guard from the Salford area of Greater Manchester in 2003 when he was wrongly charged with the attack on the mother of two. Well, we can now tell you the Criminal Cases Review Commission has offered an unreserved apology for failing him after those 17 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, there's plenty more coming your way in just a moment. But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News. And here's Bev Turner with all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello again, good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's 20 minutes worth of queues on the eastbound side of the M56 as emergency resurfacing repairs continue. So a lane closure in place. It's from the Chester services at junction 14 through towards the Runcorn turnoff at junction 12. Still queuing clockwise towards the QE2 bridge. This, of course, is the M25. Slow back towards Lakeside at 30 follows an earlier bump there. Long queues northbound for the M23, Gatwick Airport at 9 up towards junction 8, that's the M25. 2 lanes combed off at the scene of an earlier bump. They're heavy back towards Peace Pottage at junction 11. On the ferry, still around about 90 minutes worth of delays on DFDS. That's between Dover and Dunkirk. It's all due to earlier passenger illness there on the ferry. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
One more story in. Milton Keynes, absolute chaos in the city. 300-odd youths arrested or at least involved in a
stampede.
A stampede.
Yeah,
what's been going on?
A stampede through the...
there we are.
This is the video. So this is a stampede through a shopping centre in Milton Keynes. I think, Amy, you live there, don't you? You live nearby.
For those on radio, we can see literally hundreds, scores of kids.
I think there are about 300 kids.
Are they in school uniform?
Yeah, quite a few.
This is as they've broken up from school, presumably.
Security tried to intervene. They've been accused of being heavy-handed. But I think this speaks to the fact that the landscape of youth services has just been decimated and there's literally nothing for kids.
So hang on, whoa. You think that this has happened because social services have been diluted?
Youth services.
This is because there's no police around, there's no oversight, there's no deterrent, and 300 kids think that they can run through a shopping centre, frightening shoppers out of their lives.
Going to a shopping
Amy,
centre.
sorry, my kids would not be behaving like that because there's no ping pong available at the local
Aren't your kids like
youth
age
centre.
4 and 5? These are teenagers, and our teenagers are headed into a world where there are no leisure services, there are no
nothing to do with crime.
If
we up the ante on basketball, it's not going to stop kids being stabbed on the street.
What creates antisocial behaviour is having nothing to do.
It's lack of discipline in the home, lack of discipline in the home, and lack of policing on the streets, and a judiciary and a penal system that is utterly liberal.
You're going right to the end of the line. What about the preventative measures?
What about the people that these people affect by running through a shopping centre and stampeding? When there's mothers with kids in prams frightened out of their lives, and we're worried about the social services aspect
I'm talking about
that's perhaps led to
You're
it.
talking about stick, right?
Yeah. So how long does your solution take to resolve it? Mine takes about 30 seconds. More police, bang them up. Yours...
Russell, should parents be fined?
More police, bang them up.
Absolutely. And the kids should be taken to task.
Welcome back. It's 4:39. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, coming up, we may have left the European Union, but that doesn't stop them interfering in our national affairs. And this time, they're trying to take over our precious fishing industry. That and so much more to come. Now, the Prime Minister has cracked down on smoking, but apparently smartphones are next on his agenda. UK ministers are considering banning the sale of smartphones to under-16s, and top Tories are concerned about the harms of social media on children and are now discussing what the government can do about it. And this comes after a recent survey for the charity Parents Kind found that 58% of parents think smartphones should be banned for under-16s. Well, let's now speak with the political editor at The Spectator, Katie Balls. Katie, delighted to have you on the show. Welcome. So you've written an excellent piece in today's Times, and you say that a ban-happy Tory party, first they've banned ciggies and vapes for kids, now they've got their eyes on our smartphones. Why?
Yes, and I think coming on the week of the tobacco ban or its second reading in Parliament, there is a sense of, oh, what next? But I think there's a discussion currently going on in government, which is various options are still being considered. They haven't completely decided on one. But where there is agreement is there is concern, I think, from the Prime Minister to his Deputy Oliver Dowden to Number 10 aides about the potential link between smartphone use and social media and deteriorating mental health in teenagers. And we saw in the recent CAS report last week reports of how amongst girls there's more cases of mental health issues at the moment. And therefore, if there is a link between the two, and there's lots of studies claiming there is, what can they then do about it? Could it be the most extreme option, which you mentioned, which would be banning perhaps smartphones for 16-year-olds, the sale of smartphones basically for anyone under 16? Or are there some other options, such as potentially a social media ban for under 14s? You've seen that in some states in the US. And I think, it is tricky, it's complicated to make these options practical, but it is a live debate in government.
Katie, they can't stop teenagers getting hold of drugs. They can't stop teenagers getting hold of booze or ciggies, and they can't even stop teenagers accessing online pornography, no matter how much they've tried via age verification, online filters, online blocks. They simply haven't been able to do so. Why on earth do they think that this would even work?
Yeah, I think it's completely valid in the sense that when I was speaking to some figures privy to these discussions, so, well, how on earth would you ban a smartphone for under 16s? A lot of them already have it, for example. They said, well, you could have it like a tobacco alcohol ban, in a shop, you'd get ID'd. But I don't think that addresses the issue because, of course, if you have hundreds of pounds to buy a smartphone, most of the teenagers, 11 plus, who are getting those, it's not their own money. Their parents are buying them for them. So while you have surveys on one hand saying parents are worried about the effects of smartphones, parents are also, I think, a bit like, do I want my child to be the odd one out of class if I give them a very basic phone? So I think that was one of the reasons why I think we're first going to see potentially a consultation, lots of parents being asked for their opinions, potentially children too. And that's why I think Number 10 are now leaning to almost trying to start this national conversation, as one put it to me, to get thoughts on it, because it's going to be impossible to ban smartphones, probably just generally impossible. But I think it's going to be really tricky to crack down on it unless you have consent from parents about the risks. And I think that's probably what they're trying to do next.
And Katie, you mentioned it in your piece that they're all reading this book called The Anxious Generation. They're now being led by this kind of psychobabble of people need the state to protect them. That's not very conservative, is it? When did the Conservative Party become this party that ban everything, control our lives and become interfering in our lives so much?
Well, I think when you speak to Tory MPs, they do feel the number of things they're banning is not what they expected, you'd get to after nearly 14 years of Tory government. And particularly the smoking ban, I think, because there's something, arguably very illiberal about the sense of someone never being allowed cigarettes. I think, though, on social media, what's quite interesting is some surprising groups in the Tory party are more open to a ban. So, for example, Miriam Cates, very much seen as an MP on the right of the party, she's been quite vocal about potentially a smartphone ban. So you have some of the Conservative right who believe in, protecting children, actually teaming up with some, who would usually be pro-bans. And therefore, there might be more of a coalition in the Tory party for this than some more straight bans on, nanny state fast food or cigarettes.
OK, Katie Balls, fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us. And that's political editor at The Spectator, Katie Balls. Great stuff. In a previous life, I used to advise the government on banning porn for kids. And I told them this, you can't do it. Forget about it. What you got to do is teach critical consumption. It's out there. The genie is out of the bottle. You can't take kids' phones away. They're simply going to do it in the secret. What you got to do is just advise them and educate them, be responsible on their behalf. This banning nonsense, it won't ever work. It's just my opinion. Now, coming up, the battle for Britain's fishing industry is reignited as the EU regulation rears its head once again. It really is off the scales. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight. The wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in, and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas. And now through this evening, it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. The southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:48. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, there's still so much more to come as we also look at Prince Harry's abandonment of his home as he moves his primary residence to the USA. What a state he's in. But before that, the European Union launched legal action over the UK for, wait for it, a ban on catching sand eels in British waters. The ban was first announced back in January to protect puffins and other endangered birds, a good cause, which live off this particular type of eel. But it's a ban which has received a lot of backlash from Danish and Swedish fishermen. Well, joining me now in the studio is John Flesher, Deputy Director at the Conservative Environment Network. Thanks for joining me, John. Two things here. First of all, this proves we never actually got Brexit done if we can go and still have these fishing wars. But the main point is this is a piece of legislation designed to protect fragile ecosystems, and yet the EU don't care.
Well, what I find amazing about this, this story is that you and I and millions of other people voted to leave the EU in 2016 precisely because we wanted decisions about British land, British waters to be taken in Britain. And this is a decision that the government's taken, and I applaud them for it, to protect British wildlife. We're a nation of animal lovers. We care deeply about conservation to protect birds like puffins and kittiwakes, charismatic species that the public really want. And yet this is being met for reasons that I understand but certainly don't agree with by the EU, arguing this is in breach of the fishing agreement that we reached with them as part of the Brexit deal.
And it says something, John, and when I was a Brexit Party MEP, several of my colleagues were on the PESH, the Fishing Committee. And what was astonishing about that, John, was that things like pulse fishing, using electricity to kill everything in a certain area, to hoover it up into super trawlers. These were things that the European Union was doing with reckless abandon in British waters, oftentimes wrecking those ecosystems. They didn't care about that because the quota was king. Isn't this the same? It's like, this is about protecting wildlife. It's a good thing. And yet it's all about getting sand eels to Copenhagen and Stockholm.
Well, absolutely. And I think, what I think I'm frustrated by with this is the EU is arguing that this is a breach of the arrangement that we reached with them as part of the Brexit deal. But the UK is not discriminating against them because they're EU vessels. It's discriminating against, in this instance, a species that's really, really important for the marine ecosystem. It's also banned bottom trawling, a hugely damaging practice in 13 specific marine protected areas down the coast, which has caused particular consternation to French fishermen. It's done this because these practices are environmentally damaging. It's done that because we've got a view that we want to restore, and we desperately need to restore nature in these areas. The EU has also actually adopted a lot of those same headline targets as us. We're walking the walk. I think they need to do the same.
I don't think it's astonishing that the likes of Chris Packham, the Remainer environmentalist, absolute tumbleweed on this. Absolute tumbleweed. They're not criticising the European Union, and they should be, because putting your political stripes to one side, this is about protecting endangered species who solely and specifically and evolutionary-wise depend on this species of fish, and to simply take it away for human consumption is wrecking our environment.
No, absolutely. And I think it's worth saying that the government has acted on this following a big call for evidence that they've done over the last year, taking scientific evidence, showing public support for it. It is not acting in any way, as far as I can see, outside of its remit in doing this. And I think it's just beholden on all of us who care about the environment in whatever form to look that the answer here isn't about whether you're pro or anti-EU. It's about whether you care about restoring nature. I do, you do, millions and millions of people across Britain do. And I think The question here is the government acting to protect that? It's not about we don't like the EU or we do like the EU. I hope they can have some sensible conversations with the EU to de-escalate this, explain why we're doing this, which are ambitions, as I say, that the EU has as well, and make sure that we reach a settlement that means we can keep making decisions about what happens in our own waters for the sake of our environment.
But John, does this prove something which you may find uncomfortable as a Conservative? It proves we didn't ever really take back control of our waters, did we? The fact of the matter that the EU can take us to court over fish in British waters all those years later after leaving proves, particularly on fishing, we didn't get Brexit done, did we?
Well, let's see what happens in that court case. You know, the EU can raise whatever concerns it wants in terms of the legality of that British deal. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know how that's going to play out. I hope whatever happens that the government stands firm on this issue and says, no, we've got the right to make these decisions for conservation reasons, supported by the British population, supported by the scientific evidence, but also supported by the same kind of environmental ambitions that the EU purports to have as well. I think we're well within our rights under the agreement we've struck with the EU to take proportionate, sensible measures on the environment.
Superb. Thank you very much, John Fletcher, Deputy Director at the Conservative Environment Network, on a nice fishy debate to end this hour. Now, there's a new way if you get in touch, and you've been sending your views all through this hour. I want to read out this one quickly on Weathersfield. Of course, the asylum seekers have been pulled off site today, and Edward says this: why is Weathersfield fit for our armed forces, yet not fit to house illegal immigrants we have no need to worry about? That's an excellent point. Quickly on the Rwanda bill, Robert says this: the actions of the House of Lords in blocking the Rwanda bill prove their treachery in opposing what is now an emergency measure. They are making every effort to disrupt this government's desire to govern as the people voted for. Well, coming up, are the Tories back in turmoil after their latest sleaze scandal and the polls hitting rock bottom for Rishi Sunak? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. First, it's your weather, and it's Alex Deakin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight, the wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in, and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas, and now through this evening it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. The southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Eastbound M56 queues for around about 20 minutes. Junction 14 towards round corner 12 still has a lane shut for emergency repairs. The Buxton in Derbyshire, the A54 shut both ways between the A53 and the Congleton turn-off and queuing for investigation work. Queues on the M25 this afternoon, firstly in towards the roadworks, anti-clock before Wisley at 10. Queues for about 3/4 of an hour. Delays anti-clock 2 just towards and past Watford at 19. Northbound M23 towards the M25, so from Gatwick Airport at 9 up to Junction 8. 2 lanes shut, queues back to Pease Pottage at Junction 11 following an earlier collision. And in Salisbury in Wiltshire, the London Road, the A30 blocked between the St Mark's roundabout and the Bishop Dunfarm roundabout, and queuing, there's a car fire.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hey, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Mark Menzies Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, last night, Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill was dealt yet another massive blow when the Lords once again frustrated the Commons. And today, GB News can reveal it's about to get a whole lot worse for the Prime Minister. Also today, Prince William made his first public appearance since Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis. While helping a charity cook dinners, the visibly moved Wills was handed get-well cards and promised to look after Kate. And we'll have the full, wonderful story later in this hour. And Sir Steve Redgrave is one of Britain's greatest ever Olympians, but the BBC don't want him to work for them in Paris this summer. Is it another cancellation of a white man by the BBC? And does it feel like the England flag and the Union Jack are constantly under a barrage of attacks? Well, one Tory MP is now calling for protective legislation and even a minister for flags. Does that float your boat? That's all coming in your next hour. Welcome to the show, and always an absolute delight to have your company. We've got tons to get through this hour. Rwanda just keeps getting worse and worse for Rishi Sunak. Last night, the Lords revolted once again, bouncing on this back. More ping-pong than a youth club, and we've got some exclusive insights coming soon. It's about to get a lot worse, and the Mark Menzies debacle, now the 7th Tory MP to go falling foul of Sleath. It feels like the 1990s all over again without the good music. Now, there's a good way to get in touch with us. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Get in touch. This is your show too. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you and good evening. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom today is that the United Kingdom and the United States have announced new sanctions on a number of Iranian individuals in response to Iran's drone and missile attack on Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron has been meeting with G7 leaders in Italy today. He says the action demonstrates the UK's unequivocal condemnation of Iran's attack on a sovereign state. He said not only was Iran's reckless attack a total failure, but they've revealed to the world their true nature as the malign influence of the region. Britain is also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and army. It adds to the more than 400 sanctions already imposed on Iranian assets. The Scottish Government today scrapped its interim target aimed at reducing the country's carbon emissions by 75% by 2030. The Minister for Net Zero, Mhairi McAllan, said while the original target was unattainable, a revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale that was feasible. Greenpeace have said the Scottish Government's decision to scrap their climate target is embarrassing and infuriating. But First Minister Humza Yousaf told the Scottish Parliament the overall net zero goal by 2045 wouldn't budge.
Climate Change Committee were always clear with us that the 2030 target was a stretch target. That was clear to all of us when we all committed, when we all backed that target in the first place. But what doesn't change and what won't change is that end destination of 2045.
Now, the Criminal Cases Review Commission has offered an unreserved apology for failing Andrew Malkinson, who 20 years ago was wrongly convicted of rape. 57-year-old Andrew Malkinson was found guilty of raping a woman in Manchester in 2003. The following year, he was jailed for life with a minimum term to serve of 7 years. He could have been released after 6 if he'd given a false confession, something he was never prepared to do, instead always protesting his innocence. His conviction was overturned after fresh DNA evidence linked the crime to another man. Mr Malkinson appealed for his case to be referred to the Court of Appeal but was rejected twice. The Lord Chancellor has called his case an atrocious miscarriage of justice. Sir Keir Starmer said today the Rwanda scheme is a gimmick and a waste of taxpayers' money after the latest blow to the government's flagship bill in the House of Lords last night. The Labour leader's comments came as Downing Street declined to recommit to the Prime Minister's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground by spring. It's understood Number 10 will publish more detail about the timing of those flights to Rwanda once the legislation has passed through Parliament. MPs will consider once again the Lords' amendments to the bill, but indicated it won't be making any concessions. Labour is calling for police to investigate allegations that a Conservative MP misused thousands of pounds of Tory party campaign funds. The Times reports that Mark Menzies used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off what he called bad people, who he said locked him in a flat and demanded a ransom. He denies any wrongdoing but has agreed to give up the Conservative whip. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer saying the scandal is another reason the country needs change.
I'll be honest, there's a degree of frustration as well. We're 2 weeks away from really important local and mayoral elections when, there's a lot of positive arguments that we want to make about the change we can bring about in these elections. And yet again, we're talking about misbehaviour by Tory MPs. And if ever you needed evidence of why we need to turn the page on this shower and have a fresh start with Labour, I think it's in these allegations that are coming out today.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, Team GB has unveiled its brand new Olympic kit ahead of the 2024 Paris Games this summer. The kit features the classic red, white and blue British colours, and Adidas, the manufacturers who've produced the kit, says the aim has been to create a design that celebrates the unique aspects of Great Britain whilst also encapsulating the passion within each athlete. They hope you like it. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, we start with yet another bad day for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. Now, I'll be honest, I can't remember them having too many good days, can you? But you know what they say about bad things coming in threes? Well, today, Downing Street has refused to recommit to Rishi Sunak's spring deadline to get deportation flights off the ground to Rwanda. Next up, Mark Menzies has given up the Tory whip after an incredible story which claimed he misused campaign funds. And the Prime Minister woke up this morning to the news that, according to a major opinion poll, the Tories are trailing Labour on every major political issue, including defence, tax, migration, and wait for it, even Brexit. Now, I'm joined by our political editor, Christopher Hope, in the studio. Chris, an astonishingly bad set of news for Rishi Sunak today. Let's start with Rwanda. Once again, the Lords frustrating the bill. It's ping-ponging back. We haven't even started the Olympics yet. This endless ping-pong. And the latest revelation is it now looks like that spring deadline won't even happen.
Well, there's a week delay to it becoming law, the Safety of Rwanda bill. The plan had been for it to become law today, royal assent. That is now planned for next Thursday, subject to, yes, the House of Commons and House of Lords agreeing on the shape of this legislation. So far, there are two items the Lords want the Commons to consider adding back into this bill. One is about ensuring there's a regular assessment of Rwanda as a safe country, and secondly, should people who have fought or served with UK forces in Afghanistan not be flown to Rwanda if they arrive here illegally. Those two measures are back in front of the Commons on Monday, and then it goes to the Lords in a process called ping-pong. You alluded to the Olympic sport known as ping-pong. The fourth time, I've been told it might go as many as 6 times. We're nowhere near the end of this. Again, this delay means that the government today will not say that these flights will take off by spring. Previously, as soon as last week, the 9th of April, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, was in number 10 Downing Street with Rishi Sunak saying they will take off, and they both said these flights will take off by the end of spring. That's June 21st, by the way, before you look in your diary. That's when spring ends. They can't say that today. They're saying they'll reassess that timescale once it's cleared the House of Lords next week, if it does next week. Well, you bet the Prime Minister a single pint of beer this wouldn't happen. Looks like you're about to be the recipient of a pint of frothing stuff from number 10. Well done on that one. But talk about the longest day, June the 21st. Every day is the longest day for the Conservative Party at the moment. And to wake up to the story of Mark Menzies, this is starting to feel like the dark days of the end of the John Major regime, mired by endless sleaze. Now it's 7 that have fallen during this term. It's a nightmare. Yeah, it is. And Mark Menzies, the MP have filed. He's alleged to have used thousands of pounds from donors to fund medical expenses and to have made a 78-year-old aide to ask her for help because he had been locked up, as he said, by bad people demanding money for his release. Mark Menzies has denied all wrongdoing. He's lost the Tory whip. He's no longer a Tory MP. The government's majority is falling in the Commons overnight. Another problem. When you look at often when things are going wrong for you, they keep going wrong for you. Even when there's good news, the Tory party can't seem to get it out. Even when, for example, we went from the 7th biggest exporter to the 4th biggest exporter in the world last week. It barely troubled the scores because the agendas really, the sort of forces of politics are arraigned against this government. And we had Annalise Dodds, of course, who's the chair of the Labour Party, on the show earlier. She's written to the police demanding an inquiry. But, that was it was last time it was James Daly, the deputy chair of the Conservative Party, asking for a police inquiry into Angela Rayner, of course. The poor police, Martin. Yeah, the police are becoming politicised. Now, I want to read through this bit, astonishing. Because as we've already said, Mark Menzies is certainly not the first Conservative MP to be accused of misconduct in recent years. In fact, the Tories have lost 6 seats since the 2019 general election, and they might lose another one in just a couple of weeks' time. Now, in November 2021, former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson resigned after he was found guilty of breaking lobbying rules. Imran Ahmed Khan quit following his conviction for sexually assaulting a teenage boy in April 2022, and he was subsequently jailed for 18 months. Less than a month later, Neil Parish stepped down after he admitted watching pornography on his mobile phone in the House of Commons. In June 2023, David Warburton resigned after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and cocaine use.
And former Tory whip Chris Pincher eventually resigned from Parliament in September 2023 after an investigation found he had drunkenly groped 2 men more than a year earlier. Then Peter Bone lost his seat after a recall petition. He'd been suspended for 6 weeks following bullying and exposing himself to a member of his staff. Take a deep breath. And Scott Benton quit just weeks ago after he was caught in a lobbying sting, and he had been the MP for Blackpool South, and the bookmakers have Labour as the favourites to win next month's by-election in that constituency. Now, I've got some breaking news here. Let's bring that to you. Paul Murrell, who's the former chief executive of the SNP and is the husband of ex-First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, is understood to have been arrested in connection with Police Scotland's investigation into the party's finances. An astonishing piece of breaking news there. Chris Hope.
Yeah, we're seeing this news breaking in about the last few minutes from Police Scotland on their Twitter feed. The husband of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has been rearrested in connection with the ongoing investigation into the finances of the Scottish National Party. Mr Murrell, 59, had previously been arrested. Peter Murrell had previously been rearrested on the 5th of April 2023. So Peter Murrell arrested. A real problem here for the SNP. This ongoing police investigation looks like it could be gathering pace. Of course, Mr Murrell and his wife, Nicola Sturgeon, have denied all wrongdoing.
OK, we'll have more on that story, of course, throughout the day as more details roll in. Thank you, Chris Hope, for joining us at the top of this show. Now, let's get more on that opinion poll that makes for very grim reading for the Conservative Party. And I'm joined by the great political commentator, Captain Peter Spencer. Peter, always a delight to have you on the show. So there's no good news.
General, Mark. What's wrong with being a general? Why do I have to just be a captain?
You can be whatever you want on this show. It is after all 2024. We transitioned into a general. Peter Spencer, on a serious point, this opinion poll today in the Daily Mail is carnage for the Conservatives on every single issue, on defence, on the economy, even on Brexit, Peter. Now, bear in mind, Sir Keir Starmer, for 3 years, led the People's Vote campaign to reverse Brexit, to call for a second referendum. Even on Brexit, Sir Keir Starmer is trusted more than Rishi Sunak. What on earth is going on?
Well, to say the Tories are in turmoil, I think rather understates it. I think there's something approaching a terminal turmoil. And the reality is that if they were honest with themselves and with the electorate, they wouldn't even try to stand as a single party because they're so ideologically split. And, to use Shakespeare's lurid imagery in Macbeth, they're like two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art. They are so ideologically split that, frankly, they'd really struggle to work together as a coalition, let alone as a single party. That said, one can hardly blame Rishi Sunak, because after all, he's the guy that inherited this absolutely frightful certain sort of show, which starts with a sh. You think you probably get my drift here. That said, he has made, what he has demonstrated, though, regrettably, is a lack of political savvy. And let us look, for example, at the Mark Menzies story. This is the guy who's accused of doing really, really weird things, as well as nicking thousands and thousands of pounds. Now, it is said that Rishi Sunak, well, it said that the Conservative Party have known about this for 3 months. Did they keep it a secret from Rishi Sunak? Or if they told him, what the hell's wrong with the guy? It is obvious. You'd think if you had any political savvy, what you'd say is, oi, get this guy out and get him out now.
Peter, do you think this is starting to all feel a bit like the 1990s? You remember the end game of the John Major regime, mired in sleaze, a feeling of a party almost waiting to be put out of its misery. It's starting to feel a bit like 1997 again, isn't it?
I would go back even further than that. There was There was the Labour Prime Minister, Jim Callaghan, watching Margaret Thatcher and her cohorts bearing down, her legions bearing down on him. And he said, look, there comes a point in politics when there is a sea change, when the public knows what it wants and what it approves of. And at that stage, no matter what you say or what you do, it makes absolutely no difference.
OK, Peter Spencer, thank you for joining us. And you've been made a general today. Well done. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And likewise, thank you very much, Chris Hope, here in the studio. Now, still plenty of time to grab your chance to win a Greek cruise, travel goodies and £10,000 in tax-free cash. And here's all the details that you need to hop on board.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Great stuff. Fill your boots. Now, the Prince of Wales has carried out his first official engagements since his wife revealed her cancer diagnosis. Absolutely wonderful story, and we've got that soon. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll, do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the Red Wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:22. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, a reminder of the big news we broke a few minutes ago. Peter Murrell, who's the former SNP chief executive and, of course, the husband of ex-First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, has been re-arrested in connection with the police investigation into the party's finances. Now to a real feel-good story, and by Jove, don't we need one. Now, the Prince of Wales has carried out his first official engagements since his wife revealed her cancer diagnosis. William has been in West London visiting a charity that tackles food poverty. And he then visited a youth centre that receives food from the charity. And I'm joined by Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, welcome to the show. So, William putting his best brave face on, his best foot forward, and it was a really wonderful moment, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and something that we've been wanting to see, also something where clearly there'd been a very, very deserved break the family were having in the recent period, because for me, Catherine's video message to the nation, talking about her health in the way that she did, was perhaps the most impressive ever given by a public figure in Britain on that subject. And so good to see William, and we'll be seeing, we hope, a great deal more of him in the coming weeks and months. And then hopefully, when health permits, Catherine will be joining him.
And there's a wonderful picture on screen there viewers can see at home, and that was one of the volunteers at the charity, a lady called Rachel Candapper, who's 71, handed 2 Get Well cards to the Prince, and she also asked him if she could shake his hand, and he said yes, and she said, "I loved it. He was very down to earth. I'm never washing my hand again." But I hope that's not true. She works in the food sector, Richard.
Well, those are the sort of charming stories that make these visits worthwhile. I mean, royal engagements are tremendously important, and there's no doubt that William has got a very definite style that's tremendously pleasing. I mean, he and Catherine, working as a team, of course, have a very special cachet. No other royal couple anywhere in the world has the same cachet, the same glamour, and there's no doubt at all that it's delightful to see, and as you say, these images that cheer.
Yeah, although he's not very good at chopping vegetables, I've got to say. He needs a bit of an instruction on that. That's more like it. It's rocking the knife. Anyway, I digress. Richard, what was moving about that, though, when he was handed the Get Well cards, obviously to pass on to Catherine, he was visibly moved by it. You could tell. And isn't that a wonderful thing to see that close-up emotional connection with the public? And that's what these visits are about.
You're absolutely right, but equally, as we all know, it is a very stressful time. King Charles, I mean, obviously a very, very difficult period for him, and William knowing very well that everyone feels for him and is sympathetic. And on the other hand, you know, it's very difficult to know sometimes what to do and what to say. And it was charming. You're absolutely right. And it shows why he's got a certain shyness, a certain charm, and this comes out in these engagements.
And meanwhile, Richard, over the pond, the Ginger Whinger, clearly intimating he's going to drop his anchor. He made America today his primary residence.
Yes, he did indeed, and there's a certain finality about this. I mean, he did indicate earlier that he had considered becoming an American citizen, so that may follow, and if it does, of course, the issue of his title there'll be a distinct question mark over that. But I think that very few people will regret this. In fact, practically nobody will, according to the polls. He's very unpopular here and in the United States. Of course, Harry and Meghan's popularity has gone down, as you know. But, I mean, there's no doubt that the date I see that's set for this change was the date they were evicted from Frogmore Cottage. And the reason for that, of course, was Spare and the interviews around it were very damaging royal family. He knew what he was doing, and, well, this is the way he wishes to go. So be it. What happens behind the scenes, of course, this is another matter as to whether or not this rift, which is so deep, can be bridged.
OK, Richard Fitzwilliams, thank you very much. Maybe the strawberry blonde prince will stay and make strawberry jam with Meghan in California. Thanks for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure. Now, there's a new way to get in touch with me. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/you'll say. And we'll do that later in the hour. Now, the BBC has snubbed one of our country's greatest ever Olympians. Sir Steve Redgrave has revealed that the broadcaster has not asked him to be part of their coverage in Paris this summer. Astonishing news. Now, the 62-year-old won 5 gold medals for Great Britain between 1984 and 2000. Well, joining me now for more on this is the former BBC presenter Danny Canny, and a great friend of the show. Danny, always a pleasure, my old son, to have you on. This really leapt out at me today, Dan, because, you know, whichever way you look at it, Steve Redgrave is Mr. Rowing. He's an absolute legend. He's got more gold medals you can shake a big stick at, and yet he's lost his job, and guess what? It's to a woman.
He's lost his job because the BBC is no longer a meritocracy, Martin. Let me just read you something out, part of a mission statement. We are a diverse organisation and have much to be proud of, but we're also challenging ourselves to ensure that diversity and inclusion is hardwired. Listen to that word, Martin, hardwired into everything the BBC does. And there's an example of the hardwiring. He's lost his job. He's being binned off because he's a 62-year-old white bloke. Matthew Pinsnett, who is his fellow rower, he still is the main, if you like, the main anchor man, as it were, metaphorically. And they've brought in another very, very proud Olympian, a British sporting hero, if you like, but she's a 48-year-old woman. And the reason that she's there is that she's a woman. It's really as straightforward as that. And I can give you other examples where this hardwiring has actually cost the BBC audience figures. Just look at Ken Bruce, Martin. He was a 72-year-old fella. He had the biggest radio show in the UK. They've replaced him with someone much younger. They've lost $1 million. And where Ken Bruce has gone, which is greatest hits, they've now put millions on. Look at Sue Barker. They've binned Sue Barker off, a British icon, question of sport, just for a diverse lineup. And that's now being cancelled. Martin, this is just another example of box ticking. And it's such a shame because the audience, generally speaking, I would argue, aren't interested in this box ticking. They want the best person for the job.
Now, it's worth pointing out that the person who's replaced Sir Steve Redgrave, Dame Catherine Granger, she is a gold medal winning rower. She knows her onions. This isn't just like a diverse opinion replacement for the sake of it. But, Danny, do you think this will ever end, this diversity hiring? Or would, in the end, every last white man be exercised away from the BBC?
This isn't going to end, mate. It really isn't. And the problem is that the BBC don't need to run the organisation like a commercial business does. Now, the commercial business, for example, Ken Bruce, let's go back to 72-year-old Ken Bruce. There's no way a commercial radio station would have binned him off, mate. It's because the BBC have this guarantee of licence fee, billions of pounds of licence fee money, and they have that luxury. So at the moment, until something dramatic change with the way the BBC is funded, you can expect to see more box ticking on anything. And even if you can't actually see a diverse face, you can hear it on the television with continuity announcers. You can tell that there's a discernible Afro-Caribbean voice telling you that EastEnders is coming up. after the 6:30 news. And this has all happened in the last 3 or 4 years. It's been exacerbated since the murder of George Floyd. The whole media landscape changed. Black Lives Matter infiltrated the big mainstream media organisations, and we're now seeing the ramifications of that.
Well, Danny Kelly, you've had your Weetabix, superb as ever, but hope springs eternal. Maybe they'll get rid of one white man from the roster, Gary Lineker. Thank you, Danny, for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and after we featured the country's biggest cross of St George yesterday in my home city of Nottingham, later this hour, I'll tell you about calls for a new Minister for Flags. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. Peter Morrell, former SNP chief executive and the husband of ex-First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, has been rearrested in connection with the police investigation into the Scottish National Party's finances. The 59-year-old was previously arrested and released without charge last year. He was taken into custody this morning and is being questioned by Police Scotland. Mr Morrell resigned as the party's chief executive last March. Also in the news today, Andrew Malkinson, who 20 years ago was wrongly jailed for rape, has rejected an unreserved apology offered by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, saying it's too little, too late. 57-year-old Andrew Malkinson was found guilty of raping a woman in Manchester in 2003, but his conviction was overturned after DNA evidence linked the crime to another man. He's always protested his innocence. And the UK and US have issued new sanctions on a number of Iranian individuals in response to the country's attack on Israel at the weekend. Britain is also freezing the assets of some Iranian organisations, including the country's navy and its chief of the army. It adds to the already more than 400 sanctions imposed on Iranian assets. And the Scottish Government has scrapped its interim climate target to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. First Minister Humza Yousaf told the Scottish Parliament overall the net zero goal of 2045 wouldn't budge. And the Minister for Net Zero said while the original target does appear to be unattainable, a new revised package of climate action measures will deliver Scotland's transition to net zero at a pace and scale that is feasible. Team GB have unveiled their brand new Olympic kit ahead of the Paris Games this summer. The kit features the classic red, white and blue British colours. Adidas, who have produced the clothing, say the aim was to create a design which celebrates unique aspects of Great Britain while encapsulating the passion of every athlete. Those are the top stories. Do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's check on today's numbers for you. And the pound buying you $1.2466 and €1.1692. The price of gold is £1,912.44 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today at 7,877 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, let's get more on that big breaking news story we brought you a few moments ago. And the former chief executive of the SNP, Peter Morrell, has been rearrested in connection with Police Scotland's investigation into the party's finances. And joining us now is our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, a dramatic development north of the border. What's the latest?
Good afternoon indeed. Well, this is realistically the first major development since Nicola Sturgeon's arrest in June last year. We know that Police Scotland rearrested Peter Morrell, the former SNP chief executive, from his home at 9:13 this morning, and actually this news only really filtered out in the last half hour or so. It the Police Scotland has said that this is in connection with those investigations, Operation Branchform into the SNP party finances. And if you remember, we covered it quite a lot last year. We remember those stark images outside the Sturgeon home of the blue tent. But indeed today, Police Scotland, they've put out a statement to say that the 59-year-old man has indeed today been rearrested in connection with that ongoing investigation. They've also added, because this is such a huge discussion point online, they've also added the reminder that this is of course active as a case and people should refrain from commenting too much online because of the Contempt of Court Act. But lots of people, including Hamza Yusuf, only a couple of weeks ago said that all SNP members would benefit greatly from a swift conclusion to Operation Branchform investigations. We don't know much more, but tonight's news is the first sign in a long time that we might be one step closer for him to achieve that.
Yeah, thank you, Tony Maguire, for that update on the rearrest of Peter Murrell in Scotland early today. Thank you. Now there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News, and here's Bev Turner with all of the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Julian Brett. In West Sussex, the northbound M23. Long delays here, with 2 lanes remaining closed for recovery work after an accident. That's from Junction 9 for Gatwick Airport to Junction 8 for the M25. Hertfordshire, the clockwise M25. We've got a lane blocked by a broken down car just after Junction 22 for St Albans. Anti-clockwise, very, very slow after an accident just after Junction 19 for Watford. In Buckinghamshire, the northbound M40. We've got a lane blocked by a broken down car at the moment from the High Wycombe Handy Cross roundabout to Junction 5 for Stokenchurch, and in Derbyshire the A54 has been closed in both directions for accident investigation work. That's between the A53 Leek Road and the Congleton turn-off, causing long delays. There's more in half an hour.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
So J. Cole, who is a rapper, says that he felt terrible after releasing a song aimed at fellow rapper Kendrick Lamar and vowed to pull the track off streaming services. He said, "I ain't gonna lie to y'all. The past 2 days felt terrible," he told an audience at the Dreamville Festival in North Carolina. "I damn near had a relapse," he said.
There's a lot of young people, especially, you know, that would look at that and they will take it not just as entertainment.
It doesn't happen in any other form of art that I can think of. This is not happening in country music, is it?
Well, it's the same problem in both cases, isn't it? Who's doing the regulating? And surely it's each case on its merits, isn't it? You don't just ban a genre.
Why is there such a lot of hatred for a man who usually would have trash-talked back to stand up and say, you know, this doesn't sit well with me and I love this guy? If we look at, I think his name was Cody Fisher, the semi-professional footballer who died in a club because someone stabbed him. Now, he was stabbed because he stepped on someone's trainers. This is the level of ego we're seeing from a lot of young men who don't have any output of being able to channel that energy, and a lot of it is stemming from cultures like football, hip-hop, these sorts of things. So I'm just saying it's refreshing to see a man who could have easily wiped the floor with his lyrics say, I don't have to, you know?
That is interesting, isn't it? Because I took this into the wrong direction. It's not about pointing out the areas of concern. Actually, this story is saying, look, music and art can be giving you an example of how to live a slightly better life.
That's free speech. Saying, sorry. I'm sorry, I choose not to fight back because I love you. It may look like a wimpy thing to do, but it's still free speech.
You know what? I agree. I love you, Paul. Sorry about earlier.
Earlier on Breakfast.
Let's actually break this illegal chain of people being brought here, and then we won't need this accommodation in the first place.
Well, you can hear them, but it's not loud, no.
Just like a whoosh.
Whoosh.
Oh, that's all right.
A gentle whoosh.
Some people's homes have been flooded. It really has been a very scary time for us all here.
West Ham, we wish them well, who are playing Ellie's favourite team, who are?
Bayer Leverkusen. I'm going to Malta actually on a hen. From June.
I'd use a plane if I were you.
Join us for breakfast every day at 6 a.m.
Welcome back. It's 5:41. We're on the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, if you recall, yesterday I brought you a magnificent story from my home city of Nottingham, where they unfurled the biggest, look at it, the biggest England flag in the country ahead of St George's Day next Tuesday. A whopping 62-foot wide, resplendent on the old Market Square, my old stomping ground. And now Tory MP Andrew Rosendale has called for a minister for flags. Rosendale said, "I think many people will be quite angered by the way certain national organisations have tried to change our national flags, the Cross of St George and the Union Jack. Isn't it time that we protected and cherished our national symbols by appointing a Minister of the Crown to oversee this from the Cabinet Office?" Well, I'm joined now by a man who may well agree with that. It's Malcolm Farrow, who's the president of the Flag Institute. For starters, Malcolm, thanks for joining us. Secondly, how joyous that a Flag Institute exists. And I'm assuming, by the cut of your jib, Malcolm, you like this idea a lot.
Yes. I've been campaigning for this, along with Andrew Rosendale, amongst numerous other people, for many years. It needs to be gripped, and it's long overdue.
And why precisely do you feel that flags need to be protected? I mean, I remember an incident during lockdown, the Black Lives Matter protests, when a protester clambered up onto the cenotaph and tried to set fire to that flag. It deeply bothered me, because flags, they're not just pieces of cloth, are they? They represent something that we should protect with all of our might.
That's absolutely right. The flag is the road map, the historical map of the nation. It represents everybody in the nation, wherever they come from, whatever their background, whoever they are. We are all equal under the flag. And the flag is a symbol. That's all it is. There's nothing magic about it. It's a symbol. It's a symbol to represent us all and encourage community cohesion and a sense of unity amongst us all. And if we don't respect it, then we are disrespecting the people who have died for our freedom under that flag, or whichever flag it is, and we're disrespecting all those who work so terribly hard to make life better for everybody within our country. So yes, they need to be respected, they need to be protected, they need to be cared for, and they need to be used properly. And the one you're showing now is absolutely magnificent. I absolutely love that. Well done. Well done, Nottingham.
Yeah, in fact, yesterday, Malcolm, people were messaging me saying that Nottingham should be made the capital of the country, because you'd never see this in London. But as far as the legislation, Malcolm, what would you like to see? Presumably you'd like to see Union flags or St George's flags flying from public buildings, but do we need new laws specifically to protect flags, do you believe?
I don't know that we need new laws. It's very complicated, because our country is so old, our history is so long, and our flags have been around for such a long time that they fall well outside the normal rules and regulations which many other countries, which are more recent, like the United States, like France after the revolution, like Australia, wherever, all have proper, up-to-date regulations and laws to govern their flags. We never did have. The flag, the Union flag, which is the one you've been really talking about, is not, strictly speaking, de jure, a national flag at all. It's a royal banner. De facto, it's our national flag, but it's actually a royal banner belonging to the monarch. That's how it was conceived back in 1606, and there's a long history for that, which we don't need to go into now, and it's never been changed. But my view is that we need a royal commission to establish that flag as now the flag of the people. And if it became the flag of the people, then a minister within the Cabinet Office should have authority and responsibility for it. The example for this is Australia, where there is a civil servant in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet called the National Symbols Officer, and he's responsible, or she, for the national symbols, and reports to a minister within the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, who is responsible overall for national symbols in Australia. So we could learn from that and parallel that ourselves.
And Malcolm, there'd be no finer place to start, would you believe, than having a Union flag above every school in Britain?
Oh, absolutely. Why ever not? But it doesn't absolutely have to be a Union flag even. It could be a St George's Cross for schools in England. And if they've only got one flagpole, alternate with the county flag or the town flag or the village flag. There are a lot of flags for which we can owe allegiance. I live in a village. I live in a county. I'm proud of the county flag. I was born in another county. I'm proud of that county flag. I'm English. I'm proud of the English flag. I'm British. I'm immensely proud of the Union flag. We can be loyal to more than one symbol, but they all need to be treated with respect and given the care and attention which they're due, because they belong to us all.
Well, Malcolm Farrow, I thought that I liked me flags, but you really are Captain Flag. Malcolm Farrow, the president of the Flag Institute, an absolute joy to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us today on GB News. Now, loads of you have been getting in touch today using our new webpage, gbnews.com/your say, and I'm going to read out some of those comments in a few minutes. Hundreds of them have come in. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight. The wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in, and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas, and now through this evening it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. The southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, a man who worked for Sainsbury's for 20 years was sacked because he didn't pay for a few bags for life. Niamke Dofu put his shopping through a self-service checkout after his night shift, and CCTV showed him choosing the 0 bags used option, and he was fired for gross misconduct. Well, joining me now to discuss this in our studio is the lawyer and broadcaster and great friend of the show, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, welcome to the studio.
Join you, Mark.
Certainly is. Now, on the one hand,
yes,
he was caught bang to rights on CCTV. It looked like, and the tribunal agreed, he stole the bags, but a 20-year career dashed on the rocks over 60p?
Yeah, I mean, the headlines are horrendous, aren't they? You sort of turn around on that sort of basis. So basically, there must be a valid reason for dismissing an employee, and you have to follow due process and so on and so forth. So they can look at about capability or conduct. And there has to be appropriate procedures set in place under employment law to afford that sort of protection. What they say, however, if there's gross misconduct, you can be dismissed instantly. Now, gross misconduct includes criminal offence like theft. And the reality is, in the law, if you take property, whatever its value, with the intent of permanently depriving the person of it, then that is theft. And so what they did, they looked at the CCTV footage, and the Employment Tribunal had a look at this sort of stuff, and the guy wasn't just pressed no bags, he went backwards and forwards and so on and so forth. So he knew he was getting bags. And what they sort of turned in, I always sort of trust comes in on foot, but leaves on horseback. And so what Sainsbury's are saying in their defence is, hang on, we lost trust in the guy, even though 20 years and so on and so forth. We need to make sure we have trust in our employees. He lost that trust and therefore we got rid of him.
Do you think they've thrown the book at him, thrown the bag at him, to make all of us worry about us being watched by CCTV? Because how many people, in all honesty, watching this show have probably thought, I'll have a free bag, or you don't remember if you paid for it or scanned it or brought your own. We're all being watched. Is this fella a scapegoat?
Oh, I think without doubt it's a story and a warning for everybody. And there will be people at home, the statistics are quite alarming. For example, if you take stationery for your employer and you turn around, you've got your post-it stamps which you put in your pocket or your BIC things. There was a survey done fairly recently, said 75% of people admitted to taking stationery, for example, from their employers.
I've never done it.
Never done it. No, we're in the 25% who lie. But the reality is exactly that. And that's technically theft. And so be very careful about gross misconduct. There needs to be very clear procedures in place to make sure that people are protected and they do that sort of stuff. What the tribunal held is exactly that. They followed the process and looking at all of the evidence, and that's the key to all of this, looking at all of the evidence, they held that Sainsbury's were right to dismiss him.
There you go. So there you go. He's been sacked off for taking a couple of bags. An astonishing story. Andrew Eborn, thank you for joining me in the studio. Now, you've been sending your emails in, absolutely piles of them throughout the show. Let's read out this one here from Jim, and that's on the topic of Mark Menzies. The standard of MPs is governed by the quality of the selection process and what standards candidates are held to. Obviously, across all parties, the bar is set very low. Philip quickly adds this. It seems like both parties don't have the sense to send illegal immigrants back to France, where they came from. We need to stop giving them anything at all. The French don't put them up in five-star hotels and feed them, so why should we? Right, that's it. It's been a great show, and don't forget to get those views in throughout. I'll read all of them out as I can if I have the time. Now, that's all from me for now, but of course, Jubes & Co. is up next, 6 till 7 p.m. And don't forget to join us from 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's breakfast, followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30, and then, of course, it's Good Afternoon Britain from midday. Now, I'll be back. You'll have My Mush at 3 p.m. I'm Martin Daubney, and this has been GB News. Thanks for all your thoughts today. What a nightmare day it's been for Rishi Sunak. But as I said earlier, has there been a decent day in living memory? First Rwanda, then Sleaze, then this appalling poll. It feels like end of days. Thanks for your company. Next is Jubes & Co. But first, it's time for your weather, and it's Alex Deakin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Wet weather pushing south overnight, the wind's picking up as well. It all adds up to a much milder night than last night. High pressure is trying to move in and it will bring many of us a fine day on Saturday. But before that, we've got these weather fronts pushing south, bringing the cloud and rain today across northern areas, and now through this evening it'll spread across parts of the Midlands and down into East Anglia and the south east. Nothing too heavy, but a damp evening for many. The southwest staying largely dry. The breeze increasing across Scotland in particular, bringing air down from the north, so quite chilly across the far north. But for most of the UK, temperatures significantly higher than last night, staying up at 7 or 8 Celsius. A chilly feeling day tomorrow, though, nonetheless. A lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain in the morning over the Midlands, Wales, Northern Ireland in particular. Should get a bit brighter as we go through the day. Many areas seeing some sunny spells. A much brighter day, certainly for Scotland compared to today. Fair few showers over the Midlands and parts of eastern England, and a cold wind in the east as well. Temperatures really struggling here. In the south, we should get into the teens, but still feeling chilly in the wind. A cold night on Friday night. Touches of frost to start the weekend, but for most of us, that high pressure I talked about earlier moves in, and that will bring a fine day on Saturday. Some patchy rain across northern Scotland. And again, although there'll be some sunshine, not spectacularly warm. Goodbye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Julian Brett. In West Sussex, the northbound M23. 2 lanes are closed for recovery work after an accident. That's from Junction 9 for Gatwick Airport to Junction 8 for the M25. Buckinghamshire, the northbound M40. We've got a lane blocked here. A car is broken down from Junction 4 for the High Wycombe Handicap